Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Poppy, and before we get into today's fan fiction, I want to address the PETA's game size elephant in the room. So I just want to tell you guys what happened from my perspective, and then we'll move on to other stuff. If you don't want to hear me talk about this, just skip to this timestamp and you can get right into today's story. So as I stated in my original PETA's game video, I had tried to look up Ixie Grace on the social media handles that she had provided in her archive of her own profile, but they were either deleted or I'm pretty sure it was Instagram that's like a private account, but I actually wasn't sure if that was her, and I didn't want to just like message a random private account about it. And so I was looking through the comments on Archive of Our Own, and she had replied to a comment saying that she would love to have PETA's games get turned into an audiobook, and I was like, awesome, I can do that, right? And so I did, and said in that initial introduction of that video that if she was not comfortable with me doing this, that she could message me directly and I would be more than happy to take the video down. That didn't happen. She never messaged me. And so great, I'm gonna keep going. And so I posted the first 3. So one day I opened the YouTube app and saw that I had a copyright claim on that first video. And so I searched my email and saw that it was Ixie Grace. And the message she had put on there was that she just wanted to make sure I wasn't making any money off of the video. And I was like, oh, well, I'm not. So if that's her only concern, then great. And YouTube said that she was giving me a week to resolve the copyright claim with her directly. And they gave me her email. And I was like, awesome, I can finally reach out to her. And so I sent her a very nice email and explained that I'm a very small creator and I do not make money off of these videos. And if that was her only issue with me doing this, then to please take the copyright claim off. And a couple days later, the copyright claim is gone. Great. So that I think I was pretty reasonable in assuming that that was her giving me the okay to keep going. She never emailed me. As of the time of this recording, she has never reached out to me at all. No email, no DM, nothing. And so I decided to keep going. And I was really excited to continue with going on to the next book in the series. And I was actually going to explain this whole situation in the intro of that video and just like reiterate that she can just reply to my email and tell me to stop and I will stop. Only to find that all of the fan fictions were taken down off of Archive of Our Own. I found out later that the reason was because of fanfiction book bindings, and people are binding and selling her work for profit, which is illegal, and you should not do that. And anytime you see them on Etsy or TikTok Shop or whatever, you should report that because it's illegal. No one should be buying and selling fanfiction. It's a pretty prevalent problem. I see it on TikTok Shop all the time, and it's crazy. It's such a problem. Anyway, so someone had commented on a TikTok video of mine telling me that she had a Patreon that she was going to post everything on, but I'm not going to keep going. And I also saw that she had posted on her Patreon. I didn't subscribe to her Patreon, by the way. I just was curious. She had a post explaining why she took all of the fanfictions off, and she said, and I quote, "This was the final nail in the coffin after the YouTube incident." And I didn't think I was an incident because she never talked to me. So yeah, that's what happened from my perspective. And I'm not going to keep reading it because now I don't have access to it. So that sucks. For not only me, but for everybody who wanted to read it. And like, no one is entitled to your fanfictions. Fanfiction is literally a hobby. Like, no one gets paid for it. It's not a job. It's people who write for fun and post it online for other people to read for free. Like, so like, no one is entitled to your work. No one it should make you feel bad for taking down your work, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I just wanted to explain where I was coming from personally. Yeah, no one's entitled to your work, and if you decide you want to take down every single work you've ever done in your whole life, then that's your right, because it's your hobby. And there's the reason why we don't, like, critique fanfictions and, like, leave, like, actual, like book reviews and stuff on fanfictions. It's because it's a hobby. It's not, like, a published novel. You know, we love fanfiction. We love fanfiction authors on this page, and we do not criticize writing style, writing technique. It's very much, if that you don't like it, then you can go on to the next one and not leave some hateful comment about it. So anyway, that was what happened on my end from Peeta's Games and Ixie Grace and all that stuff. And now we're gonna move on. Mini item 2 that I want to address is I now have a Google form that is going to be linked in my description, and it's going to be linked in all future videos of fanfictions that you want me to read. Go ahead and give me your fanfiction recommendations, and hopefully I'll be able to read them on my channel. So yay! And on to the main event. So today we are going to be reading The Disappearances of Draco Malfoy by Speechwriter, and on Archive of Our Own, on Speechwriter's profile, she actually had the links to her social media profile, and I reached out to her, and she gave me the go-ahead to read this on my channel. So we're gonna do it, and I'm really excited. I love The Disappearances of Draco Malfoy. It's such a good, like, Draco redemption arc, you know? And it's Hermione, which is my personal favorite. They are my top ship, right? And they have been since I was like 13. I love them so much. So thank you, Speechwriter, for giving me the okay, and we are gonna get into it. Let's go. Also, before we start, if you support J.K. Rowling, you should leave. We don't support J.K. Rowling here. I'm gonna be experimenting with, like, accents in this one. I think I'm only gonna use a British accent when the characters are speaking and just use my regular voice for, like, everything else. So let me know if you like that. If you want me to go full British or want me to stop doing that, just comment, let me know. Okay. The Disappearances of Draco Malfoy by Speechwriter. The tags are Alternate Universe Canon Divergence, Not Canon Compliant, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Slow Burn, Redemption, Enemies to Friends to Lovers, Background Harry and Ginny, Background Ron and Hermione, former, No Dumbledore Bashing, No Weasley Bashing, No Bashing in General, Horcrux Hunting, No Beta, We Die Like Men. The Disappearances of Draco Malfoy by Speechwriter. Summary. The night that Harry and Dumbledore return from the cave, the Death Eaters are delayed from reaching the top of the astronomy tower for 1 more minute. Draco Malfoy lowers his wand. A Deathly Hallows rewrite in which Draco accepts Dumbledore's offer to fake his death and go into hiding with the Order of the Phoenix. Chapter 1. Afterlife. I can help you, Draco, said Dumbledore. No, you can't, said Malfoy, his wand hand shaking very badly indeed. Nobody can. He told me to do it, or he'll kill me. I've got no choice. He cannot kill you if you are already dead. Come over to the right side, Draco, and we can hide you more completely than you can possibly imagine. What is more, I can send members of the Order to your mother tonight to hide her likewise. Nobody would be surprised that you had died in your attempt to kill me. Forgive me, but Lord Voldemort probably expects it. Nor would the Death Eaters be surprised that we had captured and killed your mother. It is what they would do themselves after all. Your father is safe at the moment in Azkaban. When the time comes, we can protect him too. Come over to the right side, Draco. You are not a killer. Malfoy stares at Dumbledore. But I got this far, didn't I? He said slowly. They thought I'd die in the attempt, but I'm here. And you're in my power. I'm the one with the wand. You're at my mercy. No, Draco, said Dumbledore quietly. It is my mercy, and not yours, that matters now. Malfoy did not speak. His mouth was open, his wand hand still trembling. With every passing second, the wand in Draco's hand seemed to grow heavier. Do it! Hissed Bella's voice in his mind. Kill him, Draco, the filthy muggle lover. Look at his ruined hand. Look at how he stands, how he breathes. He is as good as dead already. Kill him now. Draco had been hearing Bellatrix's voice all year. In the days after his assignment, her fanatical energy had felt like a gift. She knew as well as he did that the Dark Lord had given him this mission to punish his father. "And yet," she'd said, Think of what you might achieve, Draco. It is a chance that any faithful servant of the Dark Lord would die for, to serve him beyond all others." Draco had repeated the idea to himself so many times that it had become a liturgy. This wasn't a death sentence at all. It was an invitation to the Dark Lord's right hand, and if he could only kill Dumbledore, he would cross the finish line, ensure his family's status forever, and win power and glory beyond imagining. Kill Dumbledore, and end the dark year at last. But now, as the night wind stung his eyes, as he stood shivering upon the cusp of victory, Draco allowed himself to imagine it fully. He saw himself sitting beside the Dark Lord as his most honored deputy, and he saw the truth, glowing steadily and ominously like a faint red light behind everything else. He thought he might have known it for months already. This was not a finish line. It was the starting gate. Kill once, and he would need to kill again and again to survive. And even then, even if he gave the Dark Lord decades of loyal, absolute service, he wouldn't be safe. He could be brutally punished at any time for a single error, as his father had been. He thought wildly of his parents, then of Crabbe and Goyle, Pansy and Blaise. They would suffer for his failures the way he'd suffered for his father's. His life would be the dark year drawn out forever into the future. A lifetime spent beneath a knife that hung by a thread. Draco clutched harder to the wand, telling himself to act, to say the incantation, to make the choice. But the world seemed to be dissolving around him. Everything was coming apart into incomprehensible patches of texture and sensation. There was this, the pale green light that shimmered down from the dark mark overhead, undulating over stone and flesh and rampart, like standing in an underwater place. And this, the tacky stick and reek of cloth in the damp pit of his right arm, where his robes had bunched. He hadn't showered in 3 days, sleepless with preparation. And this, the hiss and whip of the wind at the top of the world. This, the depth of the lines in the old man's face. Draco was standing close enough to see where the silver hair joined into the ancient skin, like 1,000 silk threads coming out of old, soft fabric. Bella's voice faded, replaced by an echo of Dumbledore's gentle words. "It is my mercy, not yours, that matters now." The old man was right. There was no mercy anywhere else. His hand trembling more violently than ever, Draco lowered the wand. A resounding bang came from the stairwell behind him, followed by the distant crash of stone hitting stone. The voices below that had been growing louder were suddenly shut away, leaving the ramparts silent, as if they were miles away from the rest of the castle. Draco didn't even react. He was swaying, lightheaded. "We must move at once," said Dumbledore, seeming to draw strength from a place it caused him great pain to access. He grasped the ramparts and pulled himself slowly, excruciatingly upright. "Time is very short. Your wand, Draco, as quickly as you can, please." Draco handed the wand to Dumbledore, but his eyes were fixed on the flagstones. He couldn't watch his own body act, couldn't fully understand it even as he did it. Dumbledore aimed the wand over the ramparts and whispered, "Accio." A moment's silence, then Dumbledore's own wand flew up out of the darkness, cut through the night winds with a thwip, and landed in his waiting hand. Dumbledore aimed both wands at the door to the stairwell. Draco flinched backward at the motion, and the door flew shut, sealing away new sounds of shifting rock. Draco heard the lock snap into place. Dumbledore returned Draco's wand and indicated the brooms that still leaned against the ramparts. "Take the faster of the two," he rasped. "Fly to Hagrid's hut and wait there. We will speak soon enough." Draco was jarred back to his senses. Hagrid's hut? Was that supposed to be the security Dumbledore had promised? "But you said—" "You will know the full plan soon, Draco," Dumbledore insisted, his brilliantly blue eyes meeting Draco's over the rims of his half-moon spectacles. "For now, there is no time. I must ask you to fly to Hagrid, to trust, if not my judgment, my rather prodigious skills." Dumbledore managed a feeble smile. Draco hesitated. Dumbledore was visibly weakened, and the Death Eaters were on their way, and Snape had made the vow to his mother. If someone else finished Dumbledore, if no one knew Dumbledore had promised to protect him, then a muffled shout issued from the stairwell. Draco flinched, swallowed, and jerked his head in a reluctant nod. "Good," Dumbledore said. "The final touch, then." He rapped Draco on the head with his wand. Something cold trickled down Draco's back as the disillusionment charm erased him. "Go now," Dumbledore whispered. As Draco seized one broom, Dumbledore summoned the other. Draco glanced back as he mounted and couldn't help but pause at the sight. Under Dumbledore's wand, the second broom's handle was swelling like an arthritic finger, bulging outward first at random, then to mimic what were unmistakably hips, ribs, and shoulders. The wood softened, seeming to melt until it looked like pale skin, and the handle split into two legs, draped with the soft black cloth of a fallen robe. The bristles shortened and shone until they became white blonde hair, framing a sphere of wood that elongated into a human face, Draco's own face. Within seconds, another Draco Malfoy lay before them, motionless, quite convincingly dead. Dumbledore pulled up his left sleeve to reveal the skull and snake intertwined there. Draco stared into the face that had stared back at him in the mirror all year, the body he had wished he could escape. Even he couldn't discern a difference between his own self and the thing he was about to leave behind, the corpse with the mark written upon its pale forearm. Dumbledore looked up. "Go!" he said. Draco kicked off hard into the darkness and wind. He didn't know how much time had passed. The shock of what he had done was still beating slowly through him, distorting his perspective. It might have been 10 minutes or an hour since he'd lowered the wand. He sat in silence at Hagrid's rough wooden table and watched the fire crackle. He refused to look at Hagrid, who seemed to loom in the corner of his eye no matter which direction Draco turned. To say the game maker had been surprised to see him was an understatement. Thankfully, the oaf hadn't asked for information. He just grunted, his obviously dislike mingled with suspicion, and yanked out a chair for Draco to take. Vaguely, it occurred to Draco how ridiculous it was that someone of Hagrid's size lived in a place like this. It was the kind of thought he might have shaped into a joke last year to make Crabbe and Goyle laugh, before things like making his friends laugh had become unimportant. He tried not to think where Crabbe and Goyle might be now. An unwanted memory resurfaced. The moment that Fenrir Greyback had muscled his way out of the vanishing cabinet into the room of requirement. Draco hadn't expected him, hadn't wanted him. It was only supposed to be Yaxley, Gibbon, Rowell, and the Carrows, all dangerous, but all at least reliable. The sudden appearance of Greyback, the way he towered over them, the size and the rancid smell of him, everything about him in Invasion, had made Draco's mouth go dry. Crabbe, miraculously, had stood his ground as Greyback bore down on them, but Draco and Goyle had shied back a few steps, which had made the werewolf roar with laughter. Draco had collected himself, almost at once, his cheeks hot. "I didn't ask for you here, werewolf," he said through gritted teeth. "Go back! Are you listening to me? Go back in!" But Greyback and the others were already stalking toward the exit, speaking in low, excited voices, ignoring Draco. Crabbe and Goyle looked at Draco, expecting instructions. For an instant, he could only look back at them, wondering, with a rush of panic, where Blaze and Pansy were. Draco knew Greyback would attack them, as he would attack anyone in the castle, indiscriminately. "You two stay here," he ordered Crabbe and Goyle. "Keep the room open so we don't waste time getting back in after it's done." Then Draco strode through the towering aisles of forgotten objects to meet the others. He would not run. Running was a mark of desperation, and it would make him look like a child, and he wasn't a child. He'd planned this entire attack, hadn't he? At its end, he would be not just a man, but one of the most feared men in the country, and when he had the Dark Lord's favor, he would make Greyback pay for ever dismissing him. The thought had heartened him. It had made him feel powerful. Now, Draco stared into the fire, his palms sweating. He felt ill. In a matter of hours, Crabbe, Goyle, Pansy, and Blaze would all think he was dead. Tomorrow, Dumbledore would make some grave speech about it to the school, probably about how his death had been the Dark Lord's fault, and just one more reason to stand together and fight him. Draco gritted his teeth. He didn't want to be used like that. His advice to the other Slytherins wouldn't be to take up arms against the Dark Lord. It would be to sit down and stay silent. If someone in power tells you what to do, do it. Whether that's you-know-who or Dumbledore. Don't be a hero. Don't try to figure out what you believe. Survive. Disappear. He told himself again that he had made the right decision. Dumbledore was a fool when it came to things like his trust of Snape and his worship of Potter. But the headmaster had defied the Dark Lord for decades. He could hide them, surely. Draco and his parents could flee the country, change their names, and keep their heritage boxed away. They would be safe and obscure. No one. Draco closed his eyes. The flames danced dully in abstract shapes behind his eyelids. If someone had told him 2 years ago that he, the heir of the House of Malfoy, would ever hope to fade into insignificance, he would have laughed in their face. Of course, a lot of things had seemed funny before. Hagrid broke the silence after what must have been hours. "There's Professor McGonagall coming now," he rumbled, peering through the window. Minutes later, McGonagall strode into the hut. Her face was smudged with rock dust, her temple bruised, and a thick red scrape was drawn across her jaw. She closed the door and checked the curtains were drawn before facing Draco. He avoided her eyes. McGonagall's gaze was always unforgiving, but it felt even more penetrating than usual tonight. "What's happened?" said Hagrid, staring at McGonagall. "You've been hurt." "Death Eaters, Hagrid." Her eyes were still boring into Draco. "They gained entry to the castle. You didn't see the Dark Mark then?" "I was sleeping until Malfoy turned up. Ruddy hell, are they still here? Do you need me to fight?" "No need." Professor Dumbledore returned to the castle in time to turn the tide, very fortunately. And everyone's all right?" She managed a thin smile. "We all have our limbs, Hagrid." "Oh." Hagrid huffed out a long breath. "Good. Well then, you want a cuppa, Minerva?" "No time, I'm afraid." She turned to Draco fully now. "Mr. Malfoy, Professor Dumbledore has explained the circumstances." Draco still didn't look up, but he could feel Hagrid's curious stare joining McGonagall's accusing one. "I'm sure you will be relieved to hear," she went on, "that none of your classmates were injured by the Death Eaters tonight. As for the Vanishing Cabinet, it has been dismantled, and the passage between them closed." Malfoy didn't answer. If McGonagall was waiting for him to weep with joy for the Death Eater's failure and repent upon his knees, she would be waiting a long time. He could hear the judgment in her voice, the poorly disguised anger, even disbelief of what he'd done. She hadn't really understood the circumstances at all then. He found himself thinking, begrudgingly, of how Dumbledore had listened to him. Dumbledore, at least, had acknowledged the danger he faced. Still, his friends were unhurt. A knot eased inside his stomach. "What about my mother?" he said, more belligerently than he had intended. McGonagall's lips thinned. "Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks have already been sent to retrieve her from your home." He looked up at that. "They think they're just going to walk in, do they? My cousin, who's been an aura for about 7 seconds, and a patched-up werewolf who—" "That will do," McGonagall barked. "I assure you, Mr. Malfoy, our Order members are quite capable of doing the task assigned to them. And as you yourself are meant to have attacked Albus Dumbledore tonight, signs of a struggle at your home will only send a clearer response to the Death Eaters." "Signs of a... You're not..." Draco struggled for words. "They won't..." McGonagall paused. For the first time, she seemed to soften slightly. "Your mother will not be harmed, of course. Lupin has taken along a vial containing Dumbledore's memory of tonight's events. Narcissa will be shown that you are safe and well, and urged to come and meet you." She paused. "As for the struggle, I mean that Remus and Tonks will break any protective enchantments at your home and lay evidence of a fight to match our story." Draco looked away. "All right, then," he muttered. "And the Death Eaters? Have you killed them yet?" A moment's ringing silence. When he glanced back, both teachers looked shocked by the question, or maybe they were shocked by the way he'd said it, dully, as if it cost him nothing. Draco couldn't keep the contempt from his expression now. Did they really think he felt any affection for the other Death Eaters, who had stood back and laughed while Draco was threatened? His father slandered, his mother mistreated. Kill them all, he thought savagely. What does it matter? "No, Mr. Malfoy," said McGonagall with a deep, concerned frown. "One Death Eater was killed in the crossfire, but the others are being transferred to Ministry custody within the hour. We intended to allow one of the Carrows to make a narrow escape, so that you know who will learn the details of your death tonight. Otherwise, he might be inclined to investigate your mother's disappearance too closely." She pursed her lips. "It goes without saying that we would rather not allow any Death Eater to go free, but it is certainly better for Alecto or Amicus to escape than Greyback." "I didn't let him in here," Draco said under his breath. His face felt hot and full, as if his blood had turned to boiling water. "Greyback wasn't supposed to come." If McGonagall heard him, she made no sign. She was rummaging in a bag. He raised his voice. "Where are you taking me? What's the safe place Dumbledore says you've got?" "You will be sheltered at the Order headquarters. We'll go up to the castle now. You're to use the Floo network. You come too, Hagrid. Albus would like to fill you in." "Ah, yes, here." Something soft and silvery spilled out of McGonagall's bag. An invisibility cloak. "Up now, Malfoy, put this on." He rose automatically on legs that still felt unsteady and took the cloak. As they slipped out onto the dark grounds, McGonagall went on. "Professor Snape is attending to Professor Dumbledore at the hospital." Draco stopped dead, half under the cloak. "Snape? He doesn't know about this, does he?" "Of course he does." Draco stared back at her aghast. He could hardly believe that they could have been so stupid. "Then you're going to get us killed." "Merlin's beard," Hagrid said. "Keep your voice down." "I'm telling you," Draco hissed, looking frantically between the two teachers. "You have to listen to me. Snape works for the Dark Lord. He's been trying to help me get to Dumbledore all year. If you've told Snape the plan, I'm as good as dead already." "Mr. Malfoy, please," said McGonagall sharply. "Severus will be no more involved in your concealment than any other member of the Order. Professor Dumbledore has sworn to see to you and your parents' well-being personally. I assure you, he is up to the task." Draco hardly heard her. The only thing that mattered was that she wasn't listening. She didn't believe him. Fear rushed through him, making his whole body cold. He'd trusted Dumbledore to think up something advanced, something unbeatable, and instead the old fool had gone right to Snape. The moment Snape was unattended, he would tell the Dark Lord the truth. Draco could see it all playing out in his mind. The Death Eaters would beat the Aurors to his mother. They would torture and kill her, and then his father. Draco would be responsible. His thoughts raced madly into the past, back to his own idiotic choice. He'd had Dumbledore powerless in front of him. He should have killed the old man, yes, he saw that now. Should have killed him and found a way to fake his own death, to make his own escape. But it was too late now. He'd succeeded where nobody had thought him capable of success, and in the end, he and his parents would die in pain and disgrace anyway. Unless a glimmer of hope appeared. He tried to swallow and couldn't. The lump in his throat was as large and sharp as a clump of broken glass. Unless, could Snape choose to lie for them? Draco knew he was Snape's favorite student. He'd always been the best in the class at potions, besides the Granger mudblood anyway. And hadn't Snape tried to help him all year? Hadn't Snape, unknown even to the Dark Lord, sworn an unbreakable vow to help Draco? Maybe there was a chance. If he or his parents had posed a threat to the Dark Lord, it would have been Snape's sworn duty to reveal them. But Draco had been entrusted with no secrets. His father had been locked in Azkaban for a year, and his mother was not a Death Eater. Was it so impossible that Snape would show mercy? Simply allow the Malfoys to evaporate? Besides, he considered with a fresh surge of hope, double agents have to think tactily. As long as Dumbledore lived, Snape had to keep the secret, or his loyalties would be revealed. Draco took a slow breath. Yes, that was good, solid reasoning. He had some time then. Snape would surely seek to kill Dumbledore soon, to fulfill the vow, but Dumbledore didn't need to survive forever, only long enough to hide Draco and his parents somewhere not even Snape knew. As long as Dumbledore lived, he was safe. "Fine," he said. "Let's go." He let the invisibility cloak fall over him and followed McGonagall up the long, sweeping lawn. Draco hadn't seen the castle so empty all year. Sneaking up to the room of requirement, he'd had dozens of near misses with inconveniently placed Order members on patrol, or teachers looking sleepless and harried, their wands held loosely in their hands as if they were always expecting attack. Now they didn't pass so much as a ghost. Most of the portraits were sleeping in their frames, although occasionally a figure would stir and watch McGonagall and Hagrid, seemingly alone, pass down the corridors. The torchlight shone through Draco's invisible body as he followed the teachers up a long staircase. He felt a kind of exhaustion beyond physical tiredness. The morning seemed as if it had happened a year ago, when he jerked awake in the Slytherin dormitory with the same fear that had been closing in on him for months now, the feeling that his time was running out. He felt mostly numb now, and yet, as he gazed blankly around the halls of Hogwarts, knowing he could never come back, his insides seemed to coil and twist like a nest of serpents. "Ah, Minerva! Lock the door, please," said Dumbledore's voice as they entered the hospital wing. It was so late that he was unattended. Even Madame Pomfrey had gone to sleep. "Professor Dumbledore!" Hagrid's eyes widened at the sight of the headmaster lying in the infirmary bed. In his haste to get to Dumbledore's side, he clipped an empty bed with one of his enormous knees, sending it flying with a resounding clang as if it were made of straw. Draco hardly noticed. He had stopped in his tracks. A second person lay motionless in a nearby bed, a figure with Weasley red hair. Draco couldn't tell if he knew him, because the face had been mangled and torn so violently that his features resembled a red blur. Draco felt as if he had been kicked in the stomach. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Hadn't McGonagall said that none of the students had been hurt? But of course, most of the Weasleys had left Hogwarts. Draco remembered how the twins had left last year, flying out of the entrance hall, Umbridge raging after them. He remembered feeling a reluctant sense of amusement, even admiration. He'd had to wipe the tiny smirk off his face when Dumbledore had rounded, seething, on the inquisitorial squad, her face so shiny and purple that she looked like a peeled onion. Draco's mouth was slightly open. He realized his vision was blackening at the edges with the speed of his breathing. He finally managed to tear his eyes from the deep gashes from the skin that had been arranged delicately back into place like a hideous puzzle. But his thoughts felt disorganized. The hospital wing seemed too bright. He knew without needing to ask that the wounds were from Greyback. Had Dumbledore asked him here so he would be forced to see this, the consequences of what had happened tonight? So was he meant to feel guilty, even responsible? No, Draco thought with a kind of furious panic. He refused to feel responsible. What good was it for him to feel that, or even see the destroyed face? He'd turned his back on the Death Eaters. What more could he do? Anyway, he'd told Greyback to go. He seized on that fact and held it tight. "Go back," he'd said. "Go back." "Draco," said Dumbledore, "please show yourself." Still breathing hard, Draco didn't want to take off the cloak. He didn't want Dumbledore to see him again, not standing feet from the mauled body where the line could be drawn so obviously between them. What if Dumbledore changed his mind and decided he didn't want to help him anymore? He knew he couldn't last on his own. "Now, Mr. Malfoy," said McGonagall impatiently, holding out her hand. "The headmaster needs rest, and you need to leave as soon as you can." Draco swallowed and took off the cloak, and dropped it into McGonagall's waiting hand. Dumbledore looked concerned at the sight of him. "Are you all right, dear boy?" he asked. Draco stared at the old man. All right? Was that a test? Was he supposed to compare himself to the horrible injuries of the figure in the bed? And to realize that he was all right, but only not at the expense of whichever order member it was? Was that the psychological game Dumbledore was playing? Draco realized his face had twisted up. "Never been better," he forced out. McGonagall and Hagrid looked irritated, but Dumbledore was as serene as ever, twinkling away in his bed. Draco didn't want to look at them. All Gryffindors, he realized, standing unified against him. Instead, he glared at Dumbledore's blackened hand lying against the white sheets. "Well," he said, "when are you going to get my father out of Azkaban?" Hagrid let out a furious, strangled noise. Get his... What?" Even McGonagall couldn't restrain an odd little sound that sounded like a cat choking on a hairball. Dumbledore did not look at either of them. He met Draco's eyes, and, almost at once, Draco felt an inexplicable sense of safety settle over him. He hated himself for the feeling. So far, hadn't Dumbledore done little more than hurl him back into danger with his idiotic trust of Snape? And yet there was something in that ancient face that still radiated power, and therefore reassurance. "As I said earlier," Dumbledore said calmly, "Lucius is safe enough in Azkaban for the time being. There is no need to fear for his life, especially now that Lord Voldemort will consider him, after the apparent death of his son and wife, more than sufficiently punished. In fact," he added mildly, as if commenting on the weather, If we act out his death immediately after your mother's, it will make both deaths rather less convincing, I think. But you know you're going to do it. You have a plan. Dumbledore inclined his head. Well? Draco said impatiently. What is it? Malfoy, barked McGonagall, who clearly thought he was being too demanding with a convalescent man over a century old. But Dumbledore silenced her by lifting his healthy hand, which, Draco noticed, was not trembling nearly so badly as it had on top of the tower. Sometime in the coming weeks, said Dumbledore calmly, members of the Order will visit Lucius in Azkaban under the guise of informing him of your death. They will, of course, tell him the truth instead. They will also provide him with a dose of Draught of Living Death to drink soon thereafter. One corner of Dumbledore's mouth lifted. After his burial in the family plot, I dare say we might find him under slightly less surveillance. Then he can be fetched back to headquarters too. Hagrid couldn't seem to contain himself. But Professor Dumbledore, sir! He burst out. How are we to know Lucius Malfoy won't run right back to you-know-who after getting out of Azkaban? Draco snapped. Part of him had been waiting for something like this, waiting to vent some tiny fraction of his fear and anger. Because, he snarled, my father's smart enough to not waltz back to the Dark Lord, while your lot have my mother and me all but captive at your headquarters. Thank God I'm not relying on your brains to keep us alive. The expected maroon color flooded Hagrid's cheeks. Draco wanted him to retort, wanted an excuse to fight, but before Hagrid could respond, Dumbledore broke in. To your question, Hagrid, he said, voice slightly raised, I do not believe that Lucius would risk his wife and son for anything, especially for a loyalty to Lord Voldemort that wavered so soon after his master first lost his body. Now he looked toward Draco, stern-faced for the first time since Draco had said the word mudblood on top of the astronomy tower. Draco, he said with a touch of steel, not just here, but while you are at headquarters, I must ask you never speak to a member of the Order that way again. To protect you puts them all at risk. You owe them, if not your gratitude, your respect. Draco clenched his jaw. All sorts of thoughts flew through his head, namely that he hadn't asked for the oaf's help, that he wouldn't trust Hagrid as far as he could throw the great lump, that far from protecting him, if Hagrid didn't wind up compromising his family's safety by sheer carelessness, it would be an absolute miracle. But he knew insulting Hagrid would do nothing. It was Dumbledore he needed to keep happy. So he twitched his head in the smallest nod he could manage. Dumbledore did not look wholly convinced. You will promise to treat everyone who enters Order headquarters with respect. Draco closed his eyes. He could only imagine what would come pouring into that place come summer. Harry Bloody Potter, he supposed, and the Weasel King, and the Mudblood Encyclopedia, not to mention werewolves and blood traders and Aurors and generally no one he wanted to see under any circumstances ever. What does it matter? Draco ground out. Oh, it matters greatly, Draco. Dumbledore sighed and lifted a goblet from the bedside. He sipped the potion inside, grimaced, and then straightened against the cushions. To respect each other, no matter our differences, is the most fundamental distinction between what the Order practices and what the Dark Lord expunges among his followers. We will have much to accomplish this summer, and I'm not working for you. The words were out of Draco's mouth before he planned them. Dumbledore looked at him with polite interest. Oh? Draco felt both Hagrid's and McGonagall's disapproving looks hot on the side of his face, but he lifted his chin defiantly. You heard me, he said coldly. I said I'm not working for you. Snape might keep quiet if he thinks my parents and I are just hiding, but if he thinks we're working against the Death Eaters, there's no chance he won't tell the Dark Lord. Professor Snape has been instructed not to reveal your survival to... He isn't working for you! What do I have to do to get that through your... That is enough, Malfoy! Professor McGonagall snapped. Really? Before Draco could snap back, Dumbledore intervened again. Please, Minerva, have patience. Draco has suffered a dreadful ordeal, and Severus does, after all, play his part convincingly enough to fool even Lord Voldemort. It is perfectly natural for Draco to be concerned for his and his family's well-being. Draco just stared at Dumbledore. He had no idea what he was supposed to feel at this collection of sentences. Were they condescending? Yes. Mollifying? Also yes, somehow. Draco couldn't understand the old man at all. He seemed so understanding of everyone and everything that It was like he wasn't a person at all, just a ghost-like entity who drifted between 1,000 points of view, acknowledging them all to be perfectly natural, without ever really feeling anything of his own. He even spoke about the Dark Lord with a bizarre kind of understanding. Draco wanted to decide it was pathetic, but he couldn't get beyond the fact that it was completely incomprehensible. What, did Dumbledore never judge anyone? Did he never prefer anyone or dislike anyone? How could he even be on his own side and say that Draco had suffered a dreadful ordeal? Draco would almost have preferred Dumbledore to look at him with loathing. At least that would have made sense. Anyway, he'd shut McGonagall up, so there was a small blessing. "I do not expect you to assist the Order of the Phoenix, Draco," said Dumbledore lightly, as if nothing had interrupted his original speech. "It is enough of a victory in terms of our aims for 3 people close to the Dark Lord to cease working against us, and it will be difficult enough for you to leave behind everything you know, to be thought dead." Draco had no response to that either. Dumbledore's expression was a bit too knowing, as if he'd guessed what Draco was imagining. His friends' faces when they learned what had supposedly happened to him, the silence in their compartment on the Hogwarts Express back home. "What are you going to tell them?" he muttered, looking at the hospital wing's scrubbed floors. "I will announce to the school that you had been sworn into Lord Voldemort's service and ordered to kill me, or be murdered yourself. I will tell them, too, that you admitted to the attacks that hurt Katie Bell and Ron Weasley. Yes, Draco," he added more quietly. "I'm afraid the school deserves to know the truth about that. The more of your behavior this year they understand, the more they will be able to understand the kind of future that awaits them under Voldemort's rule." "So you're going to use me as a warning, are you?" Draco couldn't quite keep the sneer out of his voice. "Be careful or you'll wind up like Draco Malfoy. Join up now and resist the Dark Lord, so we don't have any more Draco Malfoys in the world. Except you're still getting them killed that way, aren't you?" Dumbledore did not reply for a moment. When Draco looked up, he felt an uncertain lurch at the expression on Dumbledore's face. The old man's eyes were bright and full of pain. "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly, "for those like you, Draco, who come of age in times like these, I'm afraid that is the only choice left to make, whether to stand against evil, at risk of being cut down by its many terrible weapons, or to come quietly and be led, voiceless, into its center." Draco couldn't answer. His throat had constricted. "Is there anything else you wish to ask me before you go?" Dumbledore asked. Who's that?" said Draco, unable to look at the other bed. "Bill Weasley. He was head boy here in his time, and a prefect like yourself. I believe you know his youngest brother Ron and his sister Ginny. He will recover, though his life, of course, will be different." Dumbledore paused. "If that is all, then please read this." He handed Draco a slip of parchment. It read, "The headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix is located at number 12, Grimmauld Place." Hardly had Draco read the words when the parchment burst into a heatless flame. In seconds, it had gone. "Good night, Draco," Dumbledore said, removing his spectacles. His face looked strangely and soft and naked without them. "Thank you for what you did tonight." "Mad," Draco thought. "Night," he muttered, and then he let McGonagall steer him away, through the halls one last time and into her office, where he cast a pinch of glittering green powder upon an empty grate, spoke the address, and left his life behind. Chapter 2. The Fall and the Flight. 2 weeks later. It was lucky. The house at Grimmauld Place had several stories and a basement still strewn with dark artifacts, because if it had been smaller or duller, Draco thought he might have surrendered himself to the Dark Lord out of sheer boredom. "Draco," said his mother one evening, when he made the mistake of saying this to her, "that is nothing to joke about." Her eyes, icy blue and slightly feline, as if his own had been saturated with color, flicked nervously to the door. Draco knew she was remembering the manor, which, for nearly a year, had housed a steady stream of Death Eaters, all monitoring each other's words for hints of weakness or disloyalty. Draco yawned and sank down into his ancient leather chair. "Please, Mother, you know how hard I worked to get us this exclusive reservation. I'm not going to leave it all to you." Her expression softened, and her lips pulled briefly in a near smile. She returned to the Evening Prophet. Draco's mother looked healthier than she had in a year. Her long blonde hair, which had been lank and dull every holiday, was brushed and clean now, and though her eyes still had a red tint of sleeplessness, her movements were less nervous. Her posture had regained the rigid perfection that Draco associated with black pearls and silk robes, the lavish parties of his childhood. In general, she looked the way Draco felt, as if the previous year had been physically siphoned out of his body, leaving him lighter, able to breathe. Draco ran his fingers over the chair's cracked, faded arms and experienced a rare moment of contentment. It was mid-July and pleasantly hot, and they'd pushed up the windows of the drawing room to let in a breeze. The wizarding wireless in the corner was humming with the Clantham Cricket's symphony, and his mother was, if not happy, at least safe and comfortable. To top it all off, they'd received word 2 nights ago that Lucius had been smuggled the draught of living death in Azkaban and was to be freed this weekend. There was no owl post to the house, but the prophet and any messages came through the flue twice a day, ejected unceremoniously onto the kitchen hearth. The most eventful bit of news in the prophet so far had been their shared obituary, which had run the week after their deaths. Draco had read the piece out loud in a somber, priest-like tone that had made his mother smile with teeth, which she never did. There was a sharp canine she didn't like. "Anything worth reading today?" he asked, propping his feet up on an ottoman whose ivory legs were carved out of troll tusks. "Not particularly. The Ministry is conducting an internal investigation of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. They suspect someone there has been compromised." "Magical games and sports," Draco snickered. "Of course. All part of the Dark Lord's master plan to take over the International Association of Quidditch." One corner of his mother's mouth twitched. "They think it's a side door into the Ore office. Lax security in one department could mean a chain of imperious curses, etc., etc." "Oh." Draco paused. "And? Has someone been imperious?" His mother arched one thin eyebrow. "I don't think it's appropriate to discuss such things while we are here, Draco." She turned a page pointedly. Draco kept watching her, amused. His parents always withheld information from him for about 20 seconds. They seemed to regard it as a good exercise in patience. On cue, his mother sighed and looked over at him. "I didn't hear any plans for that department. Of course, the Dark Lord will have jettisoned anything I did hear. He'll think I was interrogated thoroughly before my death." "Of course. If Dumbledore's known for anything, it's his brutal interrogation tactics." "He is an accomplished legilimens." "Yeah, well, that didn't stop me from getting Death Eaters into his school, did it?" Draco stood and stretched. "I think I'll have the elf make me a cup of tea. Do you want any, Mother?" "No, thank you, Draco. I'll call him if I need him." She reached up absent-mindedly to touch Draco's arm as he passed, as if to remind herself that he was real. In the end, Draco headed down to the basement kitchen to make the tea himself. He wasn't fond of the elf, Croucher or whatever his name was, who had a bad habit of popping up suddenly, looking like a demented gnome. 2 days after their arrival, the hideous old thing had shown up, sent by Dumbledore, and apparently delighted to see both of them. Since then, Draco's mother has been giving the elf orders, and under her instruction, the house has grown cleaner and cleaner. There was only one type of mold left on Draco's bedroom ceiling, for instance, or rather Regulus Arcturus Black's bedroom ceiling. He'd been sleeping in the man's bedroom. "Master Draco!" yelped a deep, throaty voice when the kettle was halfway to boiling. Draco flinched and looked back to see the elf scurrying into the room, looking stricken. "Creature did not know Master Draco was in need of tea. Creature would have been honored to serve the noble son of Malfoy. Creature knows he takes his tea strong, as befits his pure blood, yes." Draco moved back with disgust. Mercifully, the elf had replaced his old rag of a loincloth with a more presentable towel, but he still reeked with the scent of decay. Probably it was all the mold. Then Draco registered the words. "How do you know how I make my tea? You've never made me any." The elf shifted guiltily, his bloodshot eyes sliding back and forth. "Creature watched. That is to say, Creature was forced to watch Master Draco last year at Hogwarts under—" His expression soured. "Master Harry's orders. Creature was made to supervise Master Draco at all times, and to tell Master Harry information. Yes, he was, though he didn't want to." Draco stared at the elf, repulsed. "At all times? What, even when I was asleep? Kreacher looked like he greatly regretted coming into the room. Kreacher felt such remorse, he gasped, his eyes swiveling violently now. Such remorse, to pry and spy on a Malfoy. Such shame. But before Draco could ask any more questions, footsteps and whispers came from the front of the house. Then the door was swinging open, and Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger were walking into the kitchen. If even he doesn't know who it is, then... Granger was whispering to Weasley, but as the door swung shut behind them, she broke off. Motionless, they stared across the kitchen at Draco for a long moment. He stared back. The last time he'd seen Weasley, they'd been near the entrance of the astronomy tower during the fight. Weasley and his sister had been shooting hexes at the Death Eaters, mysteriously sliding under every counterattack at just the right time. Draco could still see flashes of multicolored light reflecting across his freckled face. After 2 weeks of sitting in this silent house and doing nothing more exciting than banishing a centipede down the drain, the memory of the battle, the yelling that echoed in 1,000 directions, the taste of rock dust in the air as the castle took the marks of their anger, felt unreal. It was even stranger to remember the last time he'd seen Granger, the day before the fight, waving her hand in the air during one of Slughorn's potion lessons, making him suffer from secondhand embarrassment as always. It didn't seem possible that anything so normal could have been happening only 2 weeks ago. The creak as Kreacher slunk through the door brought Draco back to himself. "Don't mind me," he drawled, though his voice didn't sound as nonchalant as he wanted. "I'll be gone in a moment. Don't want to interrupt your... What is this? Are you eloping or something?" He eyed Granger's fingers, which were wrapped around Weasley's arm. "Actually, I don't think I want to know." "You've got some nerve," Weasley snapped, as Draco went back to poking through the various boxes of tea. "Enjoying your holiday, are you?" "I've had better. Doubt you have, though, Weasley." He shot a smirk over his shoulder. "This place does have multiple bathrooms, so I suppose, to you, it's practically a 5-star hotel." Before Weasley could retort, the door opened again. 4 more Weasleys poured into the kitchen, whispering among themselves. The twins, followed by the parents. "I don't care what Remus thinks you're ready to..." Mrs. Weasley was hissing at one of the twins under her breath, but as the party spotted Draco and stopped in their tracks, she lost her voice just as Granger had. Silence fell again, even more uncomfortable than before. The kettle began to whistle. Draco turned his back on them and poured his tea, suddenly aware that his mouth was dry. As he poured, he imagined spilling the boiling liquid over his fingers, imagined skin, scalded red, injured skin, like Bill Weasley's. In the 2 weeks he'd been in this place, he'd listened to order members come and go from the first-floor landing. He'd heard the Weasley parents' voice during meeting nights, but he hadn't seen them yet. He didn't want to be in a room with them, or to know what they wanted to say to him. With the steaming cup in his hands, Draco strode for the door, brushing past the mother, a dumpy little woman who smelled of cooking oil and cheap cleaning potion. He didn't look at her. He only spared the rest a glance, but he thought oddly that none of them looked especially angry except for Ron. Even Granger was giving him a wary, critical look rather than her usual vehement glare. Draco didn't exhale until the kitchen door was shut behind him. He climbed up the short stairwell into the front hall to find other figures amassing in the dusty light of the foyer. Daedalus Diggle, bouncing on his tiptoes, and Kingsley Shacklebolt, a head taller than the rest, and his cousin, Nymphadora, her hair an outrageous shade of tangerine. Tonight must be a meeting of the full order. "Draco, hello," said a weary voice. Remus Lupin had emerged at the front of the group. Draco couldn't help eyeing his robes, which had been patched so many times they looked practically quilted. Draco jerked his head in a nod of greeting and moved away from the kitchen door. But Lupin didn't go through. His old professor sidestepped with him instead, allowing the other order members to pass. Mad-Eye Moody's magical eye tracked around to stare at Draco as he clunked by on his wooden leg. "How have you and your mother been doing?" Lupin asked, voice lowered. "I know this can't be easy for you. This house is..." His tired eyes traveled over the peeling wallpaper. "Not the most welcoming place." "Merlin spare me," Draco thought with irritation. Lupin obviously hadn't changed since their 3rd year at Hogwarts. He'd been like this then, too. Annoyingly serious beneath his mantle of exhaustion, treating everyone like they were also nursing some private injury. Well, Draco wasn't. He was alive and safe and had no interest in being addressed as if he were on the verge of a breakdown. Even at the worst of things, he'd never needed pity, and especially not from a werewolf. "We're both fine," he said coldly. "I'm going up to her now." "Oh, that's nice," said Tonks indignantly as he stalked past her. "We didn't bring her here, you know, your mum. You'd think she'd have been less rude to people saving her life. I suppose it runs in the family." Draco's steps faltered. It was the first time his cousin had ever spoken to him. With a mudblood for a father and a mother estranged from the family, Tonks had never been invited to the family reunions, or the Christmas parties, or the summer gatherings that fell all the way down the manor lawns, in cascades of pastel umbrellas and platters of choux pastry. Draco had never wondered about that side of the family. Why would he be curious about anyone who'd married a mudblood? But now it occurred to him that his mother and Tonks's mother had probably visited this house together growing up. He didn't know why, but the thought made him feel oddly young. The rest of the order had filled into the kitchen now. He avoided Lupin's and Tonks's eyes and didn't answer her, starting up the long carpeted steps instead. But as he reached the landing, the front door opened again. He glanced back and saw two final order members, Snape, impassive and hooked-nosed and greasy-haired as ever, and Dumbledore, who stepped slowly, deliberately, as if every motion caused him a hint of pain. Draco watched them pass down the hall and into the kitchen. Dumbledore clearly hadn't recovered from whatever had happened to him the night of the attack, but the old man was still sticking close to Snape, still clearly trusted Snape. It was a miracle Snape hadn't found the opportunity to kill him yet. Of course, in his weakened state, the headmaster probably had to delegate everything to other order members. He was probably surrounded at all time. Maybe Snape was trying to do it in absolute secrecy, so that he could stay in the order's ranks even after Dumbledore's death. Draco glanced back down the hall to the drawing room door. He thought of his mother reading inside, thought of her look of anticipation when they'd gotten word about his father. Suddenly, the rescue didn't feel like as much of a guarantee anymore. With Dumbledore in this state, it looked like one weak poison could finish him off. Draco made a decision. He fetched the book about blood magic he'd been reading, sat on the top step, and waited for the kitchen door to open again. He knew it was no good trying to listen to the meeting. He'd tried it several times with smaller gatherings, but there was always a silencing charm on the door. This time, the meeting lasted hours. Draco had finished both chapters about blood as a potion ingredient by the time the door cracked open again. He strode downstairs as several order members reached the front door. Green flashes were emanating from the kitchen as others took the flue out. He hastened forward, not wanting to miss Snape and Dumbledore. He was in luck. When he reached the threshold, Snape and Dumbledore remained, along with Granger, Weasley, and Mrs. Weasley. Dumbledore was listening patiently to Mrs. Weasley, who was saying, "Younger order members as little more than bait, Albus!" Dumbledore raised a hand. Mrs. Weasley glanced over, saw Draco, and shut her mouth. "Good to see you looking so well, Draco," said Dumbledore with a small smile. "How may I be of use?" "I wanted a word with Professor Snape." Snape glanced at Dumbledore, who inclined his head. "I will wait for you here, Severus. Molly and I have more to discuss, clearly." Draco felt unnerved. Even Dumbledore's voice was noticeably weaker than usual. Draco wanted to watch the headmaster for any more warning signs, but soon Snape had crossed the kitchen and ushered Draco into the now empty hall. "Yes," said Snape. His black eyes were, as usual, unreadable. "I'm not going to try to stop you," Draco said quietly. Snape's expression remained unchanged. "I have no idea what you mean." Draco lowered his voice further. "I know you made the vow to my mother. I know you're going to kill the old man. I'm not going to tell anyone." Snape pushed the kitchen door all the way shut. "Then why say anything?" His lip curled. "Is this a threat?" "No, I'm asking you to wait until the Order gets my father out of Azkaban. None of the others will want to help us after Dumbledore's dead. And I'm asking you not to tell the Dark Lord we're alive." He paused, then added reluctantly, "Please." Snape looked coldly back into Draco's face. It occurred to Draco, oddly, that he was an inch or so taller than Snape now. In his mind, Snape was still the towering presence he'd been during their first potions lesson. The one professor in Hogwarts with the kind of power and mystique that Draco had wanted to learn himself. "If you had accepted my help early on," said Snape with his cool, sibilant voice, "last year would have been a great deal easier for you, Draco. You said you didn't want me to... What were the words? Ah, yes. To steal your glory." The syllables were crisp, scathing. Clearly something changed. Draco looked down at the grimy old carpet. "Fine, I couldn't," he ground out. "Is that what you want to hear? I couldn't kill him. Yet you would allow me to do it?" Draco couldn't help a bitter laugh. "Like I could stop you." He shook his head and spoke more urgently. "But even if I could stop you, I wouldn't. That's what I'm telling you. Just because I'm here, it doesn't mean I'm working against the Dark Lord. My mother and father wouldn't either. We're not a risk to him. You can just let us live and it wouldn't change anything. Do you see?" There was a long silence. Draco held eye contact, daring Snape to use legitimacy on him, to see he was telling the truth. But he didn't feel the familiar probing sensation. He wondered, with a sudden lurch in his gut, whether Snape had already revealed the truth to the Dark Lord. If, even now, the Death Eaters were waiting for Dumbledore's death to close in on Draco and his mother. But then Snape said, "Very well." He spoke so quietly that his lips barely moved. "As long as I know you are no threat to the Dark Lord, you may remain among the dead." Draco took a deep breath, relief flooding him. "Thank you, sir." He dipped his head. "You know we'll repay you when we can." "I know," Snape said. Then the potions master turned and swept back into the kitchen. Soon there was a flash of green light. He and the headmaster were gone. Moments later, Molly Weasley stormed past Draco toward the front door, muttering something to herself about reckless and so young. He heard a muffled crack as she disapparated from the front step, and when he headed down to the kitchen to return his teacup, he found Granger and Weasley still standing at the edge of the table, talking in low voices. Again they stopped at the sight of him. They exchanged one of those looks that they and Potter were always trading, as if the three of them could read each other's minds. Draco wondered how it felt to be so readable, so predictable to another person. It seemed like it would be boring. The silent transmission of information only took an instant. Then Granger seized Weasley's upper arm in a vice grip. "Run!" she said in a warning tone. "Run! Don't! Get off, Hermione!" Weasley tugged his arm free and took a step toward Draco. His ears were already red again. "I know what really happened," he said darkly. "Oh?" said Draco idly. "Well, that might sound a bit more threatening, Weasley, if I had any idea what you were talking about." Weasley's face reddened. It was too easy with him, actually. "I'm talking about the Vanishing Cabinet," he said furiously. "The Room of Requirement. Dumbledore might have told everyone else a version of things that make it sound like you didn't have a choice, but we know you did. You're not a hero just because you got cold feet at the last second." Draco's eyes slid onto Granger, whose face was a web of shadows in the weak electric light of the kitchen. She didn't add anything, but she didn't contradict Weasley either. She was studying Draco with the same hard, critical look as before, the kind he'd seen her direct at difficult assignments. The pair of them had probably discussed this at length already. Anger filled Draco as he pictured it. These two debating with Potter, deciding how best to judge him, as if the last year of his life had been some sort of theoretical moral assignment. Sanctimonious little toe rags, he thought viciously. What was the hardest choice the three of them had ever had to make? Whether to go with each other to the Yule Ball? Whether to keep their mouths shut in front of Umbridge so they wouldn't get detentions? What a struggle. Draco spoke only when he could be sure his voice wouldn't betray his anger. "You think I need your approval, Weasel King?" he said, softening his words to the same cold sneer that Snape had just used on him. "You think I give a damn whether you think I made the right choices or not?" "No!" Weasley snapped. "I don't think you give a damn. I think you only thought about yourself, like always. And that's why my brother's going to be scarred for the rest of his life." His voice had risen to a yell. He took a deep, shaky breath and tamped down the volume, though his words still trembled with fury. "It all just went away for you, didn't it, Malfoy? The second you're out of danger, everything's back to normal, eh? Well, it didn't go away for me and my family. My brother nearly died for you Death Eaters to get a second chance you didn't deserve." Draco just looked at him. The accusation had not hurt him. Actually, hearing the words, all of the heat in Draco's body seemed to drain, and now he just felt as if he was standing several paces away from himself, watching himself be lectured, watching his own blank face. It was like the feeling of occlumency, the numb remoteness, the total closure of himself to an external force, and the strange accompanying hyper-awareness of what was happening inside his own mind. Inside, odd fragments of memory were surfacing. He remembered the Quidditch pitch in second year, watching Weasley's curse backfire, the slugs that had oozed out of his mouth. He remembered laughing so hard at Weasley's embarrassment and discomfort that no sound came out. And during sixth year, he'd guffawed over the Slytherin table at the way he'd broken Potter's nose. He remembered the satisfaction he felt as the bridge crunched beneath his foot and blood streamed down over Potter's face. Potter getting what he deserved, pain and humiliation. The arrogant fool. He remembered, too, the Christmas holidays last year, when the Dark Lord had come to the manor accompanied by a Muggle man from the neighboring town, who had drunkenly mocked his robes. Draco remembered the Muggle man's glassy look, and how it had broken when the Dark Lord lifted the Imperious Curse, and how all the other Death Eaters had laughed to see him try to get away. Draco remembered the way the man's naked feet had slipped and scrambled comically on the shining parquet floors, the syncopated rhythms of his ragged breaths, the pain and terror on his crimson face as he spun, asphyxiating, into the air, directed by the Dark Lord's wand. Draco had tried to make himself laugh, told himself it was funny, just a filthy muggle getting what he deserved. That was the phrase that went through his head, cold and clear and mechanical, as if it were something he had memorized, wrote out of the textbook. Anyway, when commingled with the others' laughter, the sounds he forced out of his throat sounded more natural, and Bellatrix looked at him like she was proud. All of this flickered and died in his mind within an instant. He was back in the kitchen and legally dead. Weasley was still flushed, but the redness of his skin had lost its humor. Draco left his teacup on the counter and walked out of the kitchen. 2 weeks later, Hermione looked into Ron's eyes as he told her everything was going to be fine. Doubt must have shown on her face because he repeated, "It will." "Yes," she said. Yes, I'm sure it will. You're right." She didn't sound convincing, even to herself. Ron sighed. "Well, if you don't feel safe with Shacklebolt, Mad-Eye, Lupin, and Dumbledore there, I'm not going to be able to talk you into it. You ready to go?" Hermione nodded, feeling ill. "It's for Harry's sake," she told herself. "You're going to see Harry in a matter of minutes." Then she shot a guilty look at Ron. Maybe she was imagining it, but she felt as if he'd started acting odd whenever she brought Harry up of her own accord. She'd been at the Burrow for most of July now. Maybe she'd been stupid to expect it at a house filled with Ron's family, but she didn't know what she thought. That Ron would make a passionate declaration? No, maybe not. But she had hoped that without Harry there, Ron might move in that general direction. She felt as if she were going mad. Whenever they found time to discuss their hunt for the Horcruxes, discussions that required them to be hidden in Ron's room, she felt the tension in the air between them, and in her own body, pleasurably tense, like a string about to be played. And sometimes she could swear she felt Ron looking at her from across the room, or the crowded dinner table, but when she looked toward him, he was always in the middle of turning away. She supposed it was reasonable to wonder why she hadn't tried to move things along. Ginny had asked that precise question when Hermione had fretted to her one evening about Ron's behavior. I don't know," Hermione said, taken aback. "I suppose... Is it because Ron's a boy?" Ginny said, flicking through a page of Quidditch Quarterly. "Never thought you'd be so old-fashioned, Hermione." "No, it's not," she said hotly. It's because, well, this thing that we have to do with Harry. If Ron and I are seeing each other, it could strain the whole situation." "Oh, right. And it'll be much less strained like this," Ginny chortled. "The both of you looking like you're constipated whenever you finish a completely average conversation." Hermione sighed and laid back on Ginny's bed, while Ginny settled herself deeper in the poof by her window. Unfortunately, Hermione couldn't be entirely open, because a secret part of her dared to ask the question that neither Ginny nor Ron ever would. Did she feel something for Harry? It felt almost impossible to separate the tangled threads of what she felt for her two best friends. A feral kind of protectiveness, affection and tenderness, even jealousy. She felt it all for the both of them, so strongly that she wondered whether she might be mistaking it for romance with Ron or missing it with Harry. She wondered whether, if Harry had been here instead of Ron, and they had been having these private and intense discussions, she would have felt a similar tension. She even wondered whether, if it had been Harry who had been poisoned last year, Harry whose bedside she'd attended for weeks on end, her feelings might have developed that way instead. Or had she attended Ron's bedside precisely because she'd been so hurt by his relationship with Lavender? She couldn't tell, and her logical mind knew perfectly well how ridiculous it was to try and cross-examine previous possibilities as if they changed anything. And also, they were fighting a war, and all of this seemed pathetic and trivial, and still somehow like the most important thing in the world. All her feelings amplified by the danger they faced, as if the constant possibility of disaster were a drug. Now or never, and more likely never. Of course, she couldn't tell Ginny any of this. The idea of revealing that she might have feelings for Ginny's ex-boyfriend, with whom she was about to undertake an undercover mission, would have destroyed Ginny. Hermione knew that. She also knew that if she felt anything for Harry, it would destroy Ron, too, his fragile self-confidence. These threads of guilt spun another indecipherable dimension into what she felt. So, Hermione had been keeping it all inside. And now, on the brink of seeing Harry again, she was feeling a kind of relief that made everything even more confusing. Why relief? When Ron's presence made her feel fluttery agitation, when she'd become this attuned to his voice and his glances, why on earth was she relieved that they'd failed to start things while they had the time and privacy? Was it because secretly she didn't want to be with Ron? Or was it because it would have been too much to start a relationship when they would soon be in danger? Was stasis reassuring because this kind of stasis was already too much to feel? Well, if she knew one thing, it was that if she'd tried to talk about any of it with Ron, he would have stared at her as if she were speaking another language, so she kept quiet. When the time came, she, Ron, Bill, Fleur, and Mr. Weasley gathered in the yard around 5 brooms. Mrs. Weasley kissed her husband, Ron, and Bill, then hugged Fleur and Hermione. She performed their disillusionment charms for them before retreating, checking her watch. "You'd all better go now," she said breathlessly. "I'll see you soon. Very soon." "We'll be back before you know it, Molly," said Mr. Weasley. The last thing Hermione saw before she kicked off was Mrs. Weasley's weak, unconvincing smile. "Harry!" Hermione threw herself into his arms. When she drew back, he was grinning. "Hi, Hermione. Hi, Ron, mate." Ron clapped him hard on the back, and the anxiety of the previous month eased off of Hermione's shoulders. She could see in Ron's ear-to-ear grin that he felt it too, the comfort of being together again, a perfectly assembled puzzle. Dumbledore let Mad Eye explain the plan. 7 Potters, 7 Guardians. Harry protested, as she and Ron had known he would, but eventually relented, as he had to. Hermione shuddered through the hot, melting process of Polyjuice transformation. When they were all dressed, Dumbledore began to pair them off. Harry was matched with Hagrid, Ron with Tonks, and Hermione with Dumbledore himself on a thestral. Hermione felt a nervous flutter. "Wouldn't you prefer to guard Harry yourself, Professor Dumbledore?" "I don't think so, Miss Granger," he replied with a warm smile. "In case of an attack, it will be best to distribute the Death Eater's attention. They will likely expect Harry, skilled flyer that he is, to take a broom. He will, instead, be on a motorcycle. They will also likely expect him to be with me or with the Aurors. He will, instead, be kept safe by Hagrid." "I can go with Dumbledore instead," Ron said quietly. "I don't want you to be a target." "I don't want either of you to be targets," Harry muttered, eyes flashing. "It's all right, you two," Hermione said, trying not to sound worried. She saw Harry's worry just beneath the surface of his anger. "You know how I am with brooms. I'd rather be on a thestral." Soon, too soon, the brooms had been distributed, the thestrals mounted, Harry tucked into Hagrid's sidecar. Hermione had a gut feeling of foreboding. She didn't want to take off. She wanted to wait. She wanted all of them to be safe so badly that she felt as if she were holding her palm above a rising flame, waiting to feel a burn, praying that it wouldn't happen. Dumbledore, at her back, began to count down. 3, he called. 2, 1. Feet hit the ground. Thestral wings snapped out. A motorcycle engine roared. 7 Potters and their protectors shot up into the night sky. Hermione felt a snap, as if of surface tension, as they broke out of the protective enchantments. She screamed. Dozens of Death Eaters were shooting toward them from all directions. Black bullets out of the dark. "Hold on!" Dumbledore ordered. Hermione bent low over the Thestral's neck, and the winged horse flung itself forward, letting out a strange, wild cry of alarm as a streak of light shot over its head. Hermione threw a look back, trying to see any of the others, but all she could see were multicolored lights bursting in clusters like Roman candles, each a pocket of battle. Already they were so far away from each other. Harry had gone due north. Dumbledore had mentioned that. She squinted that way, eyes watering as the wind buffeted her, and saw that Dumbledore's instincts had been good. The lights there were fewer and thinner. Clutching to the shred of reassurance, Hermione turned her eyes forward again, only to realize that they hadn't been nearly so lucky. Death Eaters were pelting toward them. They had drawn 6, maybe more. A stunning spell spiraled toward her out of the black. "Protego!" she cried, before remembering all the practice she and Ron had done to master non-verbal shielding at the Burrow. The instinct had gone out of her. It felt safer to scream, to let out the fear. But at the next burst of light, she forced herself to think Protego, and the Death Eater's curse rebounded. She felt Dumbledore moving behind her, blocking several curses with a long sweep of his wand. "Parasolvus!" he cried, and a shivering translucent wall curved around Hermione, blocking everything that came near. She could feel Dumbledore shaking. It's the cold, she thought wildly. He's only shivering from the cold. And yet she was horribly aware of his dead hand and the thinness of his other wrist. But Dumbledore was casting spells of such immense power now that the hair on the nape of Hermione's neck stood on end. A stream of silver light hummed toward Bellatrix Lestrange, making her and her broom freeze in midair. Another Death Eater he encased in a web of purple electricity, and the man dropped like a stone, disappearing almost at once. "We're going to be all right," Hermione told herself, sending a stupefy of her own toward a Death Eater. Then a familiar face rose up before them. In the center of a card of Death Eaters was Severus Snape, his face twisted, shocks of light cartwheeling across his sallow features. Hermione's stomach plummeted. Why was Snape here? And why, when Snape was supposed to have fed Voldemort incorrect information, had there been Death Eaters here at all? There was only one answer to both questions. Snape raised his wand. Hermione knew he was going to say the words before he said them, knew he was going to snarl, "Avada Kedavra!" She knew the shield around her would break. She knew Dumbledore's body would topple off of the Thestral behind her, and yet the sudden absence of his reassuring weight, the way his robes brushed her knee as he plummeted, was so horrible that she nearly let her wand fall out of her nerveless hand. Her mouth was wide open, but hardly any sound was coming from it, only a high keen that hit her own ear like the sound of an animal in pain. Horror reverberated through her. She couldn't lift her wand, couldn't breathe. She could only wait for Snape to kill her too, or to take her, as Harry, back to Voldemort. Then the Thestral lurched. One of the Death Eater's curses had struck the creature across the flank. Hermione's grip on the Thestral had loosened. She was off balance, still in shock. She grappled too late for the Thestral's neck. She toppled, the scream finally tearing free of her into thin air. "That isn't Potter's wand!" she heard Snape roar as she fell. "Leave that one! We must find the real—" It was terrifying how quick his voice evaporated. Hermione was plummeting like a stone. She had fallen 100 feet, maybe more. The Death Eaters were no longer even in sight. Then she caught a glimpse of something in the night air, falling through a wisp of a cloud. Dumbledore's body, 50 feet beneath her, falling toward the earth. Something in her ignited. Some of the madness cleared out of her head. She clutched her wand, spread her arms to stabilize her body, Harry's body, and screamed, "Accio!" Dumbledore's body slowed its descent, then, in an almost graceful motion, lifted toward her like a piece of ash, as if he were weightless. Her hand closed around his wrist. His bones were as brittle as a bird's. Then a voice above her roared, terrifyingly close, "Petrificus totalis!" Hermione flinched. The spell missed her by a centimeter. She twisted around to see the contorted face of Antonin Dolohov. He clearly hadn't believed Snape. And now she was tumbling head over foot again, the wind snatching the duplicate Harry's glasses from her face, the houses below transforming into a blur. Dolohov's vague form was rocketing toward her on a broom, stretching out a dark shape that must have been an arm. Hermione focused with all her might on her destination and turned in midair. Crack! "If we went to the States," said Draco's mother, lifting a bite of pie to her mouth, "I know an excellent school where Draco could finish the last of his education. It's quite exclusive. The headmaster is a friend of my father's." "Narcissa," said Lucius, "by the time it would be safe for us to use that kind of contact, Draco would be past school age." He sipped a glass of elf-made wine that Creature had pulled from the cellar. Draco tapped his fork against the stem of his own wineglass. "Don't either of you want to know what I think about my own education? I am of age." His father opened his mouth to reply. Then there was an almighty crack. 3 people exploded out of the air, falling in a pile of limbs to the kitchen floor. Narcissa let out a scream and leapt to her feet. Lucius, still weak from Azkaban, staggered out of his seat and had to clutch to the counter to remain upright. 2 of the figures on the ground were already writhing up to their feet. One a boy with untidy jet-black hair, the other a man with a familiar twisted face. Draco was on his feet too, though he couldn't remember standing. He stared with horror at Antonin Dolohov, who was raising his wand. Then Dolohov saw the Malfoys and froze. His face went white. "You!" he croaked. "You!" Narcissa reacted first, slashing her wand up, but Dolohov ducked her curse. It rebounded off one of the pans hanging from the ceiling, forcing Lucius to throw himself flat. Draco looked back to see Potter raising his wand, and to see Dolohov's finger colliding with his left forearm. "Stupefy!" Draco yelled, but even as his spell struck Dolohov, causing the man to fly back into the wall and crumple, Draco felt the mark burn black on his own forearm. Silence dropped, except for the heaving of breath. Only then did Draco register the 3rd figure, a crumpled body with long silver hair and beard, motionless. Draco looked up at Potter, who was gasping, an uncharacteristic wild panic on his face. He'd lost his glasses. "Draco!" his mother cried out. "Draco, we must go, now!" But Draco was still staring at Potter, whose face had begun to change, melting, softening. For a second, Draco thought he really had gone mad, that all of this was the result of a psychotic break. But a moment later, the hair was growing bushy and wild, and the green eyes were turning brown. The chin lifted, the lips grew smaller and fuller. Draco blinked hard, and when he opened his eyes, Hermione Granger was standing before him, panic written across her face. Lucius strode to the mantel and seized a jar of flu powder. "Where?" He rounded on his wife. "Somewhere safe. Where?" Narcissa just shook her head, looking like she was about to faint. "The burrow!" gasped Granger. "Go to the burrow!" Narcissa seized a pinch of green powder and flung it on the grate, stepped over the massive hearth, and said, "The burrow!" Nothing happened. The green flame died around her. "The opposite gate is closed." Narcissa turned back. Her composure had cracked completely now, her blue eyes wild. "They'll be coming now. He touched. They'll be here any minute. Lucius, Dolohov, he saw." "Here then," Granger said. "Hurry!" All 3 Malfoys stared at her for a moment. She was holding out her hand. "Oh, for God's sake!" she yelled. "Would you rather touch a mudblood or die? Take my hand, now!" Draco was the first to move. He seized Granger's hand, and his mother and father formed a chain with his other hand. Granger stooped to grasp Dumbledore's wrist. In that moment, Narcissa let out a little cry, her eyes fixed across the kitchen. Dolohov was stirring again. Lucius slashed his wand downward. There was a blast of green light, and Dolohov toppled, lifeless, to the ground. Draco jumped so violently that he nearly let go of Granger. There was a crack somewhere outside the room, down the hall. A second crack. A third. Loud, indistinct voices. Granger turned on her heel. The crushing darkness of disapparation closed in around Draco's head. He couldn't breathe, couldn't shift an inch, could only clutch to his mother's hand in his left, the coldness of her silver rings pressing against his fingers, and to Granger's in his right, warm and small, and holding on so hard that he thought she might crack a metacarpal. They reappeared on a stretch of hardwood floor. Draco let go of his mother, who instantly folded, still gasping, her eyes wild, into his father's arms. Granger, breathing hard too, was facing away from Draco. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she knelt beside Dumbledore's body and slowly, deliberately arranged him into a relaxed position, as if he were sleeping. She moved the silver hair out of his face. The half-moon spectacles were cracked in one lens. Granger lowered her wand to them and whispered, "Reparo." The fissure sealed over, but Granger didn't stand. She stayed on her knees, trembling. Draco watched her with a sense of impossible distance. He'd known this would happen, had known Dumbledore would die. He just hadn't known he would see the aftermath. He remembered the weight of the wand in his hand as he stood atop the astronomy tower, and a terrible, thunderous kind of relief dropped onto him that he hadn't done this. Even so, he heard his own voice saying, 2 weeks ago, "I'm not going to try and stop you." Don't let it be Snape. He found himself thinking now. Don't let it have been him that did it. "Who?" he forced out. "How did it happen?" Professor Snape!" Granger was crying. He could hear it in her voice, but she didn't turn around, didn't want him to see. Maybe she thought he would mock her if he saw. Draco looked around in a daze. They'd landed in a large, finely furnished sitting room. A Persian rug stretched out beneath a long, elegant leather couch. A wall of bookshelves faced an empty fireplace. On an oak table, across from the couch, stood a strange black box with 2 metal spindles extending from its top. "What is this place?" he said. Granger had wiped her face. She rose to her feet and looked at him, her eyes red, her cheeks pink. "It's my house," she answered. Chapter 3. The Midnight Vigil. "Your house," said Lucius Malfoy, aghast. Hermione didn't bother answering. She fixed her eyes on the bookshelves and breathed, trying to draw some comfort from the familiar sense of home. Maple candles and old pages and soft leather. It didn't work. Her eyes had found a photo of herself and her parents. She was 6, ready for her first day of primary school, one of their hands on each of her shoulders. And now her mind was summoning the image she'd ruminated over a dozen times. Her parents lying in bed the night she'd modified their memories. Her mother's hair in a nightcap, her father's mouth ajar. As she'd left for the burrow that night, she wanted so badly to go back and say goodbye. If something had happened to her during their hunt for Horcruxes, if she never had the chance to say it. She'd refused to acknowledge the possibilities then, but now her eyes slid back onto Dumbledore's cold, thin body, and she knew she'd been right to expect the worst. The knowledge was strangely stabilizing. At least she could stop telling herself that she was being over-anxious. Here was proof that the world was as dangerous as it felt. "There's nowhere else you could have taken us than a Muggle house," said Narcissa, not bothering to veil her disgust. "No, the Order's safe houses are all in use tonight to move Harry." "Of course," muttered Draco under his breath. Hermione ignored him. "Wingardium Leviosa," she thought, flicking her wand. Dumbledore's body rose from the ground, and she walked him over to the sofa and let him settle there. She knew it was ridiculous to think that he looked uncomfortable, but she tucked a pillow beneath his head anyway. She glanced back at the 3 Malfoys. Lucius and Narcissa had edged closer together, eyeing the house as if afraid it might contaminate them. Mr. Malfoy looked different now than he had in the dark alleyways of the Department of Mysteries. Azkaban had followed him out into freedom. The once faint lines in his pointed face had deepened and set as if his skin were candle wax, aging him a decade. Draco wasn't looking at the house. His colorless eyes were fixed on Dumbledore's body. "Do the Order know he's dead?" he asked. His voice wasn't the usual drawl, but something unfamiliar, closed off and hard. Hermione shook her head. "I was the only one with him. The others won't even know anything's wrong on our end for another—" She glanced to a clock on the wall and was disconcerted by how early it still was. The night's events seemed to have stretched time out like elastic. "Another half an hour when they start arriving at the burrow." "Wait, you can't contact them?" said Draco with disbelief. "Yes, I know we have to, but I can't think how." She bit her lip and began to pace across the sitting room. "I don't know how to cast a messenger Patronus. That's well past any WT standard, and that's not an option for any of you, obviously." She glanced at the Malfoys. in case someone recognizes your patronesses who shouldn't, but then... She stopped pacing. I don't suppose you have a way of sending messages? You wouldn't know where to find an owl or... An owl! Lucius Malfoy let out a scathing laugh. What use would an owl be to us when we are meant to be dead? Hermione's temper flared. Well, if you have any ideas to get us out of this, I would love to hear them. Narcissa drew herself up. There would be no need to get out of anything if you hadn't apparated into our hiding place with Dolohov hanging off your robes, you stupid girl. Rage filled Hermione like hot tar. It seemed unbelievable that they were blaming her for this. She wanted to say something to defend herself. It had, after all, been impossible to feel Dolohov seizing her robes in free fall. But when she thought of the attack, her mind conjured Snape's face, full of loathing, and she felt anew the horrible sensation of Dumbledore's body sliding off the thestral behind her, brushing her as if in farewell, and her stomach began to churn, and her eyes began to sting. She couldn't make herself vocalize any of it, could only stand there and tremble, suddenly choking on her anger. She could finally appreciate why Harry hardly ever spoke about Cedric's death, even now, years after the graveyard. Draco turned away from Dumbledore's body. Hermione steeled himself for a pile-on too. She didn't know what foul thing would come out of his mouth, but she thought if it was a crack about her family here in the house that she'd had to say goodbye to, she might just start crying from rage. But he just said, "What about those coins?" "Coins?" she repeated. "The galleons, Granger," he said impatiently. "The ones you and that group had." "Oh." She gave her head a little shake to clear it. "Mine is at the Burrow with all of my things. Besides, I doubt Harry and Ron would think to check them. We haven't used them since 5th year." But as she thought back to 5th year and their ill-fated journey to the Department of Mysteries, it hit her. "The Ministry!" she exclaimed. All three Malfoys stared at her as if she'd gone mad. "Oh yeah," said Draco. "The Ministry. Brilliant idea, Granger. Just brilliant. We'll stroll in and ask to see..." "Not you!" "I'll apparate to the visitors' entrance tomorrow under a disillusionment charm. Mr. Weasley's been overtime there all summer, so he'll have to be in by 7. I'll ask him to connect our fireplace to the flue temporarily, and we can all move to the Burrow tomorrow." No response from the Malfoys. "There'll be room for us to stay here tonight," Hermione added. "My parents they're on holiday abroad." Still nothing. Narcissa seemed to have noticed the television. She was watching it warily, as if expecting it to explode. Their looks of distaste wore down Hermione's patience in seconds. "Well," she said shortly, "it's this or go somewhere the Death Eaters will find you within minutes. Take your pick. I'm going to put some protective enchantments on the house." She stalked off, leaving them there. Hopefully they would say whatever disgusting things they were all thinking about Muggles while she was out of the room. Flush it out of their systems. All of July, Hermione had tried not to let her misgivings about the Malfoys overwhelm her, but good God, they made it difficult. It rankled at her that the Order were sheltering a family who hadn't even pretended to change their minds about pureblood supremacy, people who would have gone back to Voldemort in a heartbeat if they'd had any guarantee to their safety. Now that Dumbledore could no longer protect the Malfoys, would they take their chances with Voldemort? Would they spin some story about only accepting Dumbledore's help to infiltrate the Order of the Phoenix? Ron, rather braver than she was at Order meetings, had voiced this idea at the full meeting 2 weeks ago. Dumbledore had insisted that Mr. and Mrs. Malfoy would never risk returning to Voldemort out of fear for Draco's life. "But what if Draco is in on it too?" Ron had said. "And they all pretend they were loyal the whole time. What if they pretend they were just going undercover or something? They could give you-know-who the location of the headquarters. They've seen all our members going in and out. They have a load of information they could tell him." "They can't give him the location of headquarters Weasley," McGonagall had said briskly. "With the Fidelius charms securing Grimmauld Place, only our secret keeper can divulge that information." "Well, still," Ron insisted, "wouldn't you-know-who take the Malfoys back if they gave him the names of everyone in the Order?" "Ah," Dumbledore had said with his usual serene smile, "this is where Lord Voldemort differs from you or I, Mr. Weasley. You, a great player of chess as I understand it," he inclined his head first to Ron, then to Professor McGonagall, "are thinking in terms of strategy. Lord Voldemort, on the other hand, thinks in terms of absolute, unwavering loyalty. He detests the idea of seeming any less than omniscient, and he would be furious to learn that the Malfoys were still alive when he thought them to be dead. What? Ron said with clear disbelief. You mean he'd give up a chance to learn about the Order just to teach them a lesson? Oh, certainly not, said Dumbledore. He would indeed extract any information about the Orders that he could from the Malfoys. Some they might give willingly, names and identities, as you say. Other information he would wring out of them by torture and legitimacy, or by torturing one family member to question another. Then, once he had what he needed, he would kill them for what he would perceive as an unforgivable lapse in the fealty they swore him. Dumbledore sighed. Draco's life, in particular, would be forsaken twice over, as he failed in the mission the Dark Lord sent him. The Malfoys, who had lived in the shadow of Voldemort for most of their lives, understand this. I do not think they would accept such a fate merely to further Voldemort's cause. Ron, who had gone rather pale, had not asked any more questions. But, Hermione thought, climbing the steps to the attic, Dumbledore was wrong about Snape. That had cost him his life. Had Dumbledore made other miscalculations? Had he put too little faith in the Malfoys' devotion to the cause? Or too much faith in their love for their son? What if Voldemort felt predisposed to overlook Draco's failure now that Snape had completed the mission for him? As Hermione pushed up the attic window and leaned out to cast enchantments into the summer night, she wished she could talk about all of this with Ron and Harry. She wanted to be at the Burrow with them so badly that it felt as if something had stuck in her throat, as if she would not breathe clearly again until they were safe and reunited. Protego Totalium, she whispered. They are safe, she told herself, over and over, in a sort of mantra. Still, even if, when both Harry and Ron returned to the Burrow, she could imagine their panic when she didn't come back. They would want to hunt for her, to leave the house, while the rest of the Order would forbid it absolutely. Repello Muggleton. She imagined them lying awake in Ron's room later that night, Ron monologuing in a low, anxious voice about how she was with Dumbledore, and nothing could hurt her while she was with Dumbledore. Harry, on the camp bed, would be staring at the ceiling in silence, only letting out the occasional yeah and but she could imagine the way his brilliantly green eyes would crinkle with worry. Salvio Hexia. By the morning, Ron would be angry and agitated, taking out his mood on Ginny only to feel guilty minutes later, and Harry would turn into that quiet, serious man he became when things were particularly bad, the man he wouldn't have grown into yet in a perfect world. Hermione lowered her wand, lowered the sash, and went for the stairs. Draco couldn't sleep. Granger had situated his parents in the master bedroom, where they'd stood in momentary horror at the array of devices lined up in the bathroom. Granger had said they were meant to stave off tooth decay, but they definitely looked like torture instruments, and Draco would not be putting any of them near his face. She'd shown him to a second bedroom on the ground floor, with a large soft bed. He hadn't thought it was late enough to sleep, but the moment he'd settled onto the mattress, a wave of tiredness had rolled over him. He should have fought the instinct, he thought irritably, now as he turned over. He'd reawakened at 1 a.m. Now it was 2:30, and he was still wide awake, staring into the semi-darkness. The curtains weren't quite opaque, so the street lamp outside the window tinted everything orange. The mahogany desk in the corner, the anonymous white dresser, the brass lamp with its drooped neck and hanging shade. Images kept passing across his vision. Occasionally he saw Dumbledore's face lit green atop the astronomy tower, or Dumbledore's face pressed into the kitchen tiles of number 12 Grimmauld Place, as if his cheek were the sole of a shoe, just any other object. Mostly, though, he found himself thinking of Dolohov. Dolohov spinning as Draco's stunner had hit him, Dolohov stirring on the floor, only to be struck by his father's Avada Kedavra, the way he'd slumped, lifeless, back into place. Something in Draco's mind was struck inside that instant. The moment the green light had connected with Dolohov's body, it had happened so quickly. His father had cast the killing curse the same way he'd done so much everyday magic at home, summoning books or drawing curtains, conjuring a transfigured zoo for Draco's amusement on his 8th birthday. Draco knew his father had killed before, but the idea had always been abstract. Now he wondered how many people his father had killed in total. He wondered, too, whether he'd disappointed his father by failing to kill Dumbledore. They'd so studiously avoided the subject at Grimmauld Place that an objective observer might have thought they'd all wound up there by sheer accident. His father wouldn't have hesitated to kill Dumbledore. That much was obvious now. Was it a sign of weakness that Draco had hesitated? He pictured his parents one floor above and wondered whether his father was sleeping soundly or whether he was disturbed at all by killing Dolohov, who had been closer to the family than most other Death Eaters. The man hadn't been friendly, hardly anyone would be, after nearly 14 years in Azkaban, but he had been respectful to Draco, had treated him like an adult, where most of the Dark Lord's followers had treated him with condescension. Dolohov had even said, over the last Christmas holiday, that Draco had done well to think up the plan with the Vanishing Cabinet. "If this plan of yours does work," he'd said, eyeing Draco with interest, "the Dark Lord will certainly want to see more of you in the future." Then he'd inclined his head to Narcissa and said, "You've raised your son well, Narcissa." Draco remembered the odd silence that had followed that sentence. He'd understood the implication. Dolohov would be sorry to see Draco died if he failed. "Could we have modified his memory instead?" said a quiet voice in the back of Draco's mind, but he stamped the thought back at once. That sort of thinking would get him killed. The Dark Lord had shattered Barty Crouch's memory charm on Bertha Jorkins in 4th year, and Crouch had set the charm so forcefully on her that it hadn't just held for years but deepened over time. There was no hiding from the Dark Lord, no room for nuance or affection or protection. There was only truth and death. Draco sat up, his mouth dry, and went to get a glass of water. He moved quietly through the ground floor, glancing around as he went. The house hadn't come as a surprise exactly, because he'd never been remotely curious about Granger's upbringing. Still, if he'd been asked to guess what a Muggle house might be like, this wouldn't have factored anywhere into his expectations. First, most obviously and strangely, it seemed that Granger came from some money. The house was large and spacious, with wide halls and clean, deep-pilled rugs, and many frozen Muggle photographs hung on the walls, each depicting the Grangers on different holidays. Here they were on a French beach, and there, bundled up in their odd clothes on the slopes of the Alps, and over there, laughing in street markets in idyllic towns. And while none of the house's furniture would ever have been found in Malfoy Manor, it had a clean, distinct style, a coordination between rooms and pieces that made Draco feel as if he'd walked into a world that had existed and been evolving for a long time. Obviously, Draco had known Muggles couldn't all be mud-covered farmers and witch-burning mob members, like they usually were in textbooks, but his mother in particular had always associated the Muggle world with the total absence of refinement or culture. It was hard not to feel disoriented. Even more uncomfortable was being forced to think about Granger growing up here, probably dashing through the halls, carrying stacks of books, reciting facts to her parents. He hadn't asked for a window into her life. He certainly wouldn't have wanted her wandering around his house thinking about his childhood. The kitchen was a long silvery room filled with an audible hum that made Draco uneasy. As he passed a large metal refrigerator, it rumbled, making him flinch. Had it been hexed? He checked half a dozen cabinets before he found the glasses, filled one as quickly as possible, and hurried out of the kitchen, glancing back at the refrigerator with narrowed eyes. When he reached the end of the hall, he stopped so suddenly that water leapt over the rim of the glass and slapped against the hardwood. A light had been turned on in the front room. Something was moving there. His stomach clenched, preparing him to flee, until he realized it was only Granger. She was sitting on the floor, facing away from Draco, beside the sofa where Dumbledore's body lay. She changed into Muggle clothes, a huge, soft-looking t-shirt and a pair of black leggings. Her feet were bare. Her shoulders were moving strangely, as if she were patting something on the rug where he couldn't see. After several long seconds, though, a gasping noise came from her, and Draco realized she was crying. It wasn't shallow catching of breath either, but intense, full-body sobbing that radiated through her in waves. Draco froze, certain that if he moved she would notice. The longer he stared at her, the more he felt as if he had fallen asleep and none of this was happening. Was he, Draco Malfoy, actually standing in a Muggle house, watching Hermione Granger, the obnoxious know-it-all he'd recreationally loathed for 6 years, Sob over the corpse of Albus Dumbledore? How in Merlin's name had he ended up here? He needed to get out of this somehow. His room was close. Surely he could make it. He took a step toward the door. The floorboard emitted a deafening creak. Draco's heart dropped. Granger whipped around. "Ah!" she said, wiping her cheeks hurriedly, mortification on her shining face. Her nose was abraded and her eyes swollen, so that she looked like a slightly innocent painting of herself. Draco had a clear, sudden vision of Pansy Parkinson, her eyes filling with tears last year when he told her impatiently that he didn't have time for her anymore. He'd had no idea what to say then either. I told him about Snape," Draco said too loudly. "Dumbledore. I said not to believe Snape was... he didn't listen to me." Granger didn't respond immediately. She looked back at Dumbledore's body before saying, "I know." Draco didn't ask how she knew. It probably involved Potter somehow. Another uncomfortable pause. Draco wondered if it would be reasonable to just go into the bedroom and shut the door. Then Granger took a shaky breath. "Dumbledore was so sure about him," she said, voice small but clear. "I don't know why he trusted Snape so much." Draco curled his lip. "Because he trusted everyone." Granger shot him an annoyed look. "There's no need for that tone. You're only here because he trusted you." "Yeah, well, maybe he shouldn't have." Draco registered the wary shift in her expression and rolled his eyes, sliding into the sitting room so they could keep their voices down. "I'm not going to blow up your house, Granger. Calm down. I'm just saying he never behaved like this was a war, did he? No, he was too busy acting noble." The annoyance on her face hardened into indignation. "He wasn't acting," she said hotly, rising to her feet. "I think it's admirable that he still believed in people's better natures in all this." "Oh, well, as long as you and the rest of Gryffindor House thinks it's admirable, that'll be a real comfort to him now." Draco let out a hard laugh and set his glass of water on a side table. "I hate to disillusion you, Granger, but Dumbledore didn't act like that because he believed in people's better natures. God, are you actually that naive?" Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "Just say what you think, Malfoy, and stop congratulating yourself for having an opinion." "Fine. The old man trusted people because he thought he knew everything about everyone. He didn't think anyone could possibly surprise him. He wasn't being noble, Granger. He was being arrogant. And look now where it's gotten him." Draco cast a contemptuous glare at Dumbledore and, doing so, realized that he was furious with the dead man. Furious that he'd died uselessly at Snape's hands, rather than using his legendary skill to fight the Dark Lord. Furious that he had thrown away the safety of Draco's family. Furious that he had somehow coerced Draco into believing, ridiculously, that he could keep them safe. And even more than that, Draco was livid with himself for believing it. Snape, at least, had kept his word. The potions master had waited 10 full days after Lucius's arrival at Grimmauld Place to kill Dumbledore. Draco should have made use of that time. Should have demanded an audience with Dumbledore and ensured the old man got them out of the country. If Dumbledore really had made plans for their long-term safety, those plans were lost now. Gone from the brain that lay dead inside the skull, a pound or two of useless flesh. When he looked back at Granger, she was giving him the same piercing stare she directed his way in Grimmauld Place. There was a faded shape on the front of her giant t-shirt. Her hair was even unrulier than usual, falling in tangles and puffs and stray curls over her shoulders. "What?" he said coldly. She shook her head. "Maybe you're right," she said, so quietly and grudgingly that he nearly didn't catch the words. There was another uncomfortable pause. "What is that thing, anyway?" Draco asked, nodding at the black box with the glass face, which had been staring at him in his peripherals. She glanced over at him, and her expression smoothed. "It's a television." She picked up a small black box from an end table, aimed it like a wand at this television, and pressed a button on the surface. The front of the box blazed into light. 2 muggles behind the glass were walking down a street, moving like a photograph, and even as Draco watched, the image changed to a profile view of the muggles, as if they were surrounded by invisible photographers. They were speaking, too, though the noise from the box was too quiet for him to make out the words. "What?" he said, staring dumbfounded at the box. "Was it a kind of muggle pensieve? What does it do? Why is it doing that?" "Well, this is a television show." Granger sounded amused now. It's a serialized story that you see a bit more of every week, but it can do all sorts of things. It can tell you the day's news anytime, so you don't have to wait for the paper. And she pressed another button, and the image on the screen skewed, then flashed into something else entirely. A Muggle man pointing at a large, shiny car, exclaiming something about interest rates. This is an advertisement. There are lots of those. And she pressed the changing button again, and now a Muggle was sitting astride a bear the size of a small house. That's a film. A story that takes about an hour and a half. But... Draco pointed at the television. The bear's been engorged. That's against the statute of secrecy. Oh, don't be ridiculous, she sighed. Of course it hasn't been engorged. It's a visual effect. Filmmakers use them to make us think we're seeing something out of the ordinary. Draco didn't answer. Granger clicked the button again, and the screen went dark. You'd know all of this, she said with exasperation, if you'd took Muggle studies. This is exactly why it should be mandatory. It brought Draco out of his trance. He blinked a few times, a dark rectangle still seared into his vision, and scoffed. Muggle studies. I'd sooner take divination, or a slow-acting poison, or a kick to the— All I'm saying, Granger interrupted, that familiar sanctimonious look on her face, is that you wouldn't be asking such embarrassing questions now if you'd been able to ask them in a classroom environment when you were 13. Draco gave her a withering look. He didn't need this. I'm going to bed, he said with as much disgust as he could fit into 5 syllables. Fine, good night. She frowned. Why are you awake anyway? Because taking the night air is good for my delicate humours, Granger. He picked up his water and pretended to be surprised by the sight of it. Surely this glass has nothing to do with anything. His hand was on the bedroom doorknob when her voice said behind him, Had you seen him do that before? Draco stopped mid-step, sure for a moment that he'd misheard her. Seen what? Your father. He killed that man, Dolohov. She paused. You must have known him. Draco turned slowly on the spot. Granger, standing at the foot of the stairs, looked apprehensive, but she didn't take the question back. Draco's heart was beating too quickly. He was unnerved. He tried to remember if he'd said anything about Dolohov, anything at all to suggest he'd been thinking about it. He didn't think he had, but then how could she have known? Then a rush of defensive anger overrode his doubts. It was none of Granger's business what his father had done, or what Draco had seen him do. Why was she asking anyway, trying to wring information out of him that she'd parrot back to Weasley and Potter, no doubt, and then they'd start judging his father the same way they'd judged him. That was all Gryffindors did, really, compare themselves favorably to other groups of people, and they thought they were so saintly. Draco summoned his usual contempt as he looked at Granger. He'd felt it for so long that it was effortless. Maybe the girl even thought, knowing his failure to kill Dumbledore, that he was too fragile to handle the idea of death. But he wasn't like her, sniveling and bawling over something inevitable. His father had needed to kill Dolohov, or his family's necks would have been on the line. Draco wasn't sorry about it. He wasn't. What? He sneered. Was Dolohov a friend of yours? Wanted to ask me to leave roses on his grave? Oddly, Granger didn't look angry. She looked almost resigned. No, she said. I was going to thank you for stunning him before he killed me, actually, but I suppose I shouldn't have bothered. You're a real pig, you know that, Malfoy? She stalked up the stairs. He watched the texture of her hair and clothes fade into the blue-gray darkness, feeling irritated. And confused, but mostly irritated. She was misremembering the order of events. He hadn't stunned Dolohov to save her from Merlin's sake. He'd done it because the man had reached for his mark. He hadn't even known that was her, since she'd been polyjuiced at the time, so it wasn't as if he'd thrown her a lifeline. He shut the bedroom door a bit too hard. Later, on the edge of sleep, he would think of her hand thrust out to him and his family in the dingy light of the kitchen, and he would think, vaguely, feeling unsettled, that was what a lifeline looked like. Hermione was hardly out of the fireplace at the burrow before Harry and Ron were hugging her so hard that the breath was squeezed out of her. I'm all right, she gasped. Really, you two, I'm all right. They pulled back. Ron was looking her over as if checking for missing limbs. Harry was just staring into her face, dark circles under his eyes, as haggard and sleepless as he'd looked the day after Sirius's death. Then another body slammed into the 3 of them, making them stagger. Ow! Complained Draco Malfoy's voice. Could you please move the tearful reunion? He lurched away from them, straightening up, and scanned the Burrow's kitchen, which was even more crowded than usual. Every surface stacked with decorations for Bill and Fleur's wedding. Ah, Malfoy said, scorn written in every line of his face. Of course that would require room to move. Ron went scarlet. You! Leave it, Ron! Hermione sighed, tugging him and Harry away. She threw an angry look back at Malfoy, who watched them go with glittering malevolence. His gaze skated across hers, and in an instant she remembered him standing with his hand on the guest bedroom's doorknob, looking utterly thrown by her question about his father. She hadn't missed that expression, although he'd pulled that look on quickly to cover it, the sneer he was wearing now. She understood now why Harry had sounded so unsettled when he'd recounted the events atop the astronomy tower. It was bizarre to see something other than condescension on Malfoy's face. Harry had tried to describe it, the way Malfoy had wheeled wildly between insulting Dumbledore and showing a bizarre need for his approval and protection. There was something frustrating, yet oddly enthralling about watching him struggle to keep his persona in place. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were already having a stiff, strained conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Malfoy, who had come out of the fire and were dusting off the sleeves of their robes, looking disdainfully around the kitchen. A pot on the stove was bubbling, emitting a delicious smell, as a wooden spoon twirled independently in its contents. "Come on," said Ron, already headed for the staircase. "My room. You've got to tell us everything. Dad told us..." "Dumbledore. Blimey, Hermione, what happened?" They holed up in Ron's room. By the time she finished recounting the story, tears were running down her face again, though she had exhausted most of her sobs last night. Ron's arm was around her shoulder, and the weight was comforting, although Hermione hadn't missed the uncertain look that Ron had shot across the bed when Harry had touched Hermione lightly on the forearm in reassurance. "But this changes everything," Ron said as Hermione wiped her eyes. He glanced at the door and lowered his voice. "Harry, do you reckon we can still hunt down the Horcruxes without Dumbledore?" Harry didn't answer right away. Hermione thought she recognized that look of reluctance. "Harry," she said, "don't tell us not to come with you, because it's no good." "Don't worry," Ron said. "He tried that already. I talked him out of it." Hermione glanced at Harry for confirmation. He made an unhappy mumbling sound, but didn't contradict Ron. "Anyway, Ron hesitated. "Well, we've got no help anymore, have we? I thought we'd set out to hunt for a Horcrux trail, the three of us, and we'd sort of check back in with Dumbledore when we found something, and he'd help us the rest of the way, or, I thought he'd give us a way to reach him, so if we ever got into real trouble, he could..." Ron trailed off, the tips of his ears reddening. Clearly, he was embarrassed to have been so reassured by the idea of Dumbledore's help, but Hermione understood. She, too, felt like a comforting blanket had been stripped away from them, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. "Yeah," Harry admitted. "That was what I thought as well." Ron looked relieved. "So what do we do now?" He paused. "Think we should tell McGonagall?" There was a brief silence. The ghoul moaned in the attic. Harry reached over to the bedside table and scooped up the fake locket with R.A.B.'s note inside. "No," Harry said quietly. "I think it's up to us now." A lump grew in Hermione's throat. Ron let out a slow breath, looking awed at the enormity of their task. "Honestly, Harry," Hermione said, "this worries me. From what you told us about the cave, we'll be dealing with enchantments and sorcery that are far beyond what any of us can do. Not just beyond what we learn in school. The kind of advanced magic that most wizards never manage. Without Dumbledore's help..." Harry met her eyes, and she knew they were thinking the same thing. The prophecy said that Harry had powers the Dark Lord knew not, but the fact remained that Voldemort could perform feats of wizardry that only Dumbledore and perhaps Grindelwald had managed this century. "Oh, lighten up, Hermione," said Ron, with a good try at casual bravado. "I've always fancied myself basically equal to you-know-who in terms of sheer magical power, so I reckon we've got a good shot." Harry and Hermione both grinned, but when their smiles faded, the question remained. "We'll find a way," Harry said. "Dumbledore didn't tell anyone besides us. He must have thought we were up to it." He turned the locket over in his hand, then sat bolt upright. "Oh no." "What?" Hermione and Ron said together. "The sword! It's in Dumbledore's office!" Ron swore loudly. Hermione closed her eyes. The day after Harry and Dumbledore had returned to Hogwarts with the fake locket, Dumbledore had told Harry to fetch the Sword of Gryffindor to the hospital wing. They'd intended to use it on the locket because Dumbledore had told Harry the goblin-forged object had been impregnated with the basilisk venom it had touched in their second year, making it one of very few objects that could destroy Horcruxes. Then, of course, they had drawn the locket from Dumbledore's pocket to realize it was fake. "What if we just ask McGonagall to borrow the sword?" Ron said. "You think Minerva McGonagall would let us borrow the Sword of Gryffindor?" said Harry dubiously. Without knowing why, and without insisting that we stay in Hogwarts like good little students once we got in touch? Ron grimaced. Well, when you put it that way, no, not a chance in hell. I don't know, Hermione said thoughtfully. Professor McGonagall might be the Order member who's most loyal to Dumbledore. Well, and Hagrid, she added. Neither of them have ever questioned Dumbledore's judgment. If we told her that he'd left us a task, I don't think she would necessarily rule it out. In fact, she said hopefully, if it's on Dumbledore's orders, there's a chance she might offer us her help without asking too many questions. They mulled it over for a while longer. Hermione could tell that Harry and Ron felt as bolstered as she did by the idea of the formidable witch on their side, a stabilizing force in the sudden uncertainty of their quest. You know, Ron said slowly, I reckon you might be right, Hermione. Not sure how we'll get word to her to ask, though. We can't put it in writing, Harry said. Let's go to Hogwarts and have a word with her. He looked down at the locket again. They're saying that's where Dumbledore's funeral will be. It should be safe to go then. Yes, I think so, Hermione said softly. She wanted to squeeze Harry's hand in comfort, but suddenly felt very aware of how close Ron was sitting. Did they mention when the funeral would be, Harry? He avoided her eyes, the same way he always had when she'd hoped he might talk about Sirius. Friday, he said shortly. The day after Bill and Fleur's wedding, Ron said. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Well, then that will be a change of mood. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Harry glanced up at Hermione. Are you all right? He said. You saw it happen. Yeah, Ron added quickly. If you want to talk about it, I mean... As Hermione looked at them, warmth spread throughout her. Last night she would have given anything to speak with Harry and Ron, to be able to spill out some part of what had been roiling and twisting inside her. Now, though, she was just happy to sit with them, knowing that they would worry in her absence, and embrace her on her return, and make their awkward gestures toward intimate conversation, and look at her this way, waiting for her to find words. Maybe, in time, she would be able to speak. For now, the offer was enough. Chapter 4. Breakthrough at the Burrow. Life at the Burrow was driving Draco mad. He didn't know how much more he could take. Along with Potter, Weasley, and Granger, he had 4 additional Weasleys to put up with. The parents always looked harassed, and Bill's scarred face made Draco's stomach lurch, and Ginny kept shooting looks of such longing after Potter that it made Draco feel nauseated. Then, on top of all of that, was Fleur Delacour, who glided around delivering a never-ending monologue about the wedding and treating them all like servants. At one point, she actually told Draco to help with streamers, as if he were a house elf. He just looked at her appalled, until his mother gripped him by the upper arm and steered him out of the kitchen. Mostly, Draco and his parents spent their time at the foot of the gnome-infested, weed-ridden garden, as far as they could get from the others. There was some satisfaction in this. Draco enjoyed sitting in the shade of a tree as Potter and Weasley shot filthy looks at him, pouring sweat, arranging white chairs under the beating sun. Meals, though, had to be conducted outside, and for decorum's sake, the Malfoys were obliged to sit at the same trestle table as everybody else. These hours were so spectacularly awkward that Draco felt almost delirious with discomfort. Arthur Weasley in particular seemed incapable of looking at any of the Malfoys, let alone speaking to them like a normal person. "Could someone please pass the potatoes?" Mr. Weasley would announce loudly to nobody, staring into the dusk. And when Lucius shoved them into his hand, Mr. Weasley would pretend the bowl had appeared there via some mysterious conjuration. Draco had settled on a kind of silent non-aggression pact with Potter, Weasley, and Granger. Weasley still gave him angry and mistrustful looks whenever possible, but Potter seemed much more preoccupied by Lucius's presence than Draco's. This puzzled Draco at first, until he remembered that his father had fought all 3 of them and Ginny at the Department of Mysteries. As for Granger, Draco had been suspicious at first that she might act differently toward him after their argument at her house. He found himself considering the possibility that she might corner him and try to make him speak about Dolohov or about his father. He spent time thinking up responses to increasingly invasive questions that he imagined she would ask. This time was wasted. She never approached him. Actually, of all the people in the burrow, she was behaving the most tolerably toward him. She was brisk but polite, with no long, searching looks that suggested she was just waiting for him to press his dark mark and summon the Death Eaters. This was something all of the Weasleys and Potter, and occasionally even Fleur, did. All in all, the atmosphere was less than terrific. Draco hoped he wouldn't have to put up with it for too much longer, and 2 days after they arrived, his wish came true. Shortly after dinner, Mrs. Weasley beckoned him over. "Yeah," he said, unable to keep the sullen note from his voice. With the stern look on her face, he worried what he'd done. "Arthur has discussed things with the rest of the Order," she said, "and Kingsley Shacklebolt has agreed to help transport your family out of the country. We'll start making preparations after the wedding." "Why not now?" Draco asked. She let out a short sigh. "You may have noticed we're a bit busy here at the moment, and things at the Ministry have deteriorated very quickly since Dumbledore." Mrs. Weasley's voice quavered, and she shook her head, blinking rapidly. "We think multiple members of the Ministry have gone over, and with that being the case, you're lucky Hermione was able to get you here so quickly. The Flu network is being heavily monitored already, and they've put up a blanket trace on the use of portkeys, and obviously international apparition is—" "Impossible, yeah, I know." Draco paused. "Where are you sending us?" "We don't know yet. Your family is well known even abroad, which makes it difficult to find a place you can live as yourselves. Very difficult indeed, but Kingsley will sort it all, I'm sure." She was scrutinizing his expression. Draco didn't like the look on her face, which was verging on pity. He liked even less the visions that were swimming through his head of himself and his parents alone on a desert island, gnawing rats off kebab sticks. "Don't worry," she said. To his alarm, she made a strange move with her hand as if to touch his shoulder. Luckily, she stopped herself. "Like I say, Kingsley will sort it all." "He'd better," Draco muttered. "Dumbledore promised to help us. So much for his impenetrable protection." But Mrs. Weasley clearly wasn't listening. Her eyes had narrowed in a point over his shoulder. Draco glanced back and saw Potter, Granger, and Weasley talking outside a kitchen window, washed in the red light of sunset. "You tell your parents, dear," said Mrs. Weasley distractedly. Without waiting for an answer, she strode outside, and he watched her breaking up the trio, sending Granger fleeing to the bottom of the garden. Moments later, Potter and Weasley trudged inside and past Draco, heading upstairs. Draco caught a hint of mutinous conversation. Never get a chance to. Draco felt a tug of curiosity. It wasn't like he wanted to spend time speculating about whatever sordid secrets Potter, Weasley, and Granger were keeping from the rest of the world. But there was nothing else for him to do in this godforsaken place. Also, in the 48 hours since he'd arrived here, the three of them had been acting all too obviously fishy. They were trying to talk about something, and Weasley's mother had been keeping them from doing it. But what? Draco hesitated, then crept up the stairs after Potter and Weasley. He realized almost immediately that sneaking around in this house would require extra precautions. Each floorboard creaked as if it were about to snap in two. He tugged out his wand, aimed it for his own feet, and whispered, "Silencio." Soon, he was creeping up the stairs without a sound. The stairs branched off into rickety little hallways that divided into cramped bedrooms. But Draco thought he heard Potter and Weasley's voices further up. He kept climbing, and finally paused at the top of the steps, at a juncture between a water closet and a closed door. Leaning close to the door, he heard Weasley's lowered voice. "Back to Hogwarts. She's just trying to make you feel guilty, mate." "Yeah, well, it's working," said Potter darkly. "If you get caught, then it puts them all in danger, doesn't it? And Ginny's going to be at Hogwarts, right under Snape's nose." "Yeah." Weasley sounded grim. "Easy answer then, isn't it?" "What? We can't get caught?" Loud footsteps echoed further down the stairwell. "Oh, blimey, it's her," Weasley said. Before Draco could do anything more than leap back from the door, Weasley was pulling it open, revealing a messy room plastered in Chudley Cannon's memorabilia. "You!" Weasley snarled. He and Potter were both on their feet in an instant. "What did you hear, Malfoy?" said Potter. "I'm looking for the bathroom," Draco said coldly. "You think I care what you and Weasley talk about during your slumber parties?" And he walked into the WC, closing the door behind him. But the snippet of conversation had spun the wheels in his mind. Ginny's going to be at Hogwarts, Potter had said. So he and Weasley weren't going back to school then, and presumably that included Granger too. Draco supposed he should have guessed. Hogwarts was no longer under Dumbledore's protection. Potter would have had to be a real idiot to go back for his 7th year, essentially inviting the Dark Lord into a place that housed all his friends. And if Potter was going on the run, no doubt Weasley and Granger would trail after him the way they always did. Still though, why would Weasley's mother be angry about that? Surely Potter, Weasley, and Granger would be shuttled from Order Safe House to Order Safe House. Surely the Chosen One would be given the utmost protection? No, something about it still wasn't quite right. Draco was jarred out of his thoughts by Mrs. Weasley's voice. "Ronald Weasley!" Haven't I told you 1,000 times to clean out the shed? The Delacours are arriving in less than a day, and if they see it in that state... Mom, Ron's voice groaned. Please tell me why the Delacours would give a damn about the shed. You get down there right now, thundered Mrs. Weasley. Draco looked blankly at the door. Mrs. Weasley's outbursts were yet another bewildering part of life at the Burrow. His mother would have died before showing her anger like that. Draco remembered being 8 years old and shattering a sheet of china with enchanted glaze, a family heirloom, chinoiserie, very rare. His mother hadn't yelled. Actually, she hadn't made a sound. She'd gone very pale and had looked at him in a way that knifed through him and hadn't spoken to him for a week. She'd never mentioned the incident again. Neither had Draco, but something still squirmed shamefully in him when he thought of it. He heard Ron stomping down the steps, and Potter said something, sounding meek and apologetic. Yes, thank you, Harry dear, that would be a great help, Mrs. Weasley replied, though she still sounded snappish. 2 more sets of descending footsteps later, the top of the burrow was silent. Draco snuck out of the WC, glanced down the stairs to make sure he was alone, and slipped into Ron's room. Colloportus, he muttered, wand aimed at the keyhole. The locked door would give him an extra second or two of warning. He scanned the minuscule bedroom, not knowing what he was looking for. Even if he had known, though, the place was such a bomb site that a cursory scan would have done nothing. Every single surface was layered with clothes, books, or soaring Chudley Cannon's players. Then Draco spotted a rucksack beside the camp bed. It didn't look wizard-made, which meant it had to belong to Potter. Draco extracted it from a pile of shirt and began rifling through it. At first, the contents seemed normal enough for a rucksack. Changes of clothes, a potion-making kit, an old photo album. But when he reached the front pocket, he slowed down. Inside was a shard of mirror, on which he nearly sliced a finger. He placed this gingerly on the camp bed. Beneath that was a carefully folded piece of aged parchment. Draco could tell from its delicate texture that it was decades old, but when he spread it flat on the camp bed, it was blank. A Parisium, he muttered, tapping it with his wand. Nothing happened. He narrowed his eyes, certain there was something there, hiding just out of sight. A clue to what the Gryffindors were thinking? A long and detailed list of their plans? He would come back to the parchment. He reached right down into the rucksack's front pocket, and his hand met cold metal. He drew out a glimmering golden locket. Draco lifted it up to examine the tarnished metal. He sprung its catch, and his heart beat faster as a scrap of parchment fell out into his palm. To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. R.A.B. Draco stared at the parchment. His heart had stopped beating so quickly. In fact, it didn't seem to be beating at all anymore. Horcrux. He had never heard the word before, but the rest of the note gave him a good idea of what it meant. Mortal once more. Whatever this Horcrux had been was something that gave the Dark Lord power over death. An elixir of life, maybe? Draco had heard of derivatives of the Philosopher's Stone, which were not so powerful or effective as the real stone, but which could prolong life past its intended boundaries. And Potter had this locket. Potter had some information about the Dark Lord's secrets, about how to reduce him back to a mortal man. Whatever Potter, Granger, and Weasley were planning had something to do with this. Of course, Mrs. Weasley would be terrified of the idea of her son getting directly involved in the Dark Lord's mortality, but that begged another question. Why in Merlin's name was Potter, Granger, and Weasley doing this, rather than the senior members of the Order of the Phoenix? Draco had known that Potter had a bond with Dumbledore, but he would never have guessed that Dumbledore would entrust him with this sort of information. It seemed insane, ridiculous to put this into Potter's hands. Surely there was no way they'd stumbled across this themselves. Draco only realized how long he'd been standing there, immobile, staring at the note, when he heard footsteps coming up the stairs. He began shoving Potter's possessions back into the rucksack, but before he could get the note inside the locket, he heard Hermione Granger's impatient voice say, "Alohomora," and the door flew open. "Ron, I really—" She broke off, staring open-mouthed at Draco. Her eyes traveled slowly down to the locket and note in his hands, and her eyes grew very round. She moved so quickly that he had nearly no time to react. "Obliviate!" she cried. "Protego!" he snarled. She whirled out of the way as her own spell rebounded into the door, leaving a line of splinters peeling away from the old wood. She was flustered now, and he beat her to the next spell by a millisecond. "Expelliarmus!" both their voices yelled in near unison. But Draco lunged forward onto the camp bed, out of the way, and Granger, walled in by Ron's bed, had nowhere to dodge. The spell hit her, and her wand spun out of her hand and into Draco's. "Nice try, Granger," Draco panted, rising to his feet. He shut the bedroom door hard, then advanced on her. "What is this? Tell me." He held up the locket. Her look of panic intensified, her eyes darting from the locket to the note. It's... She took half a step back so that her back was against the wall. "Tell me," he repeated. "Nothing! It's nothing! It's just..." Then her eyes darted somewhere else. The day was sweltering, and Draco had pushed his light summer robes up to his elbows. He'd cast a glamour over his forearm, but at certain angles you could still see it. The red snake and skull, like a brand, ready at any moment to burn black. Granger's eyes flicked back up to his, and Draco felt a shock of disorientation as he recognized the look on her face. In that moment, she was terrified of him. The idea didn't immediately make sense. This was the girl who had cursed Marietta Edgecombe with near-permanent disfigurement. The girl who had slapped him in the face when they were 13. The girl who, when Umbridge had taken them captive at the end of 5th year, had managed to worm her way into freedom. Granger wasn't a fearful person, yet now she was staring at Draco as if she really, truly expected him to hurt her. He moved backward from her so quickly that he nearly tripped on the camp bed. When he regained his footing, they were both breathing hard. Some of the fear had left Granger's face, replaced by confusion. Draco shoved both their wands into his pocket, his sense of disorientation growing. The power to induce fear was a Death Eater's first, simplest weapon. Even when Draco was young, his father had occasionally described that kind of power to him with cool satisfaction. "There are more effective methods of persuasion than gold," he'd said. "Though, in this day and age, it's not appropriate to use them, Draco." From the way his father had spoken of power like that, and from the way the Dark Lord enjoyed his followers' terror, Draco had thought it would feel thrilling to frighten people, to command their fear. But that, just now, it hadn't thrilled him at all. It felt like an accusation. Her look of fear told him what she thought of him, what she thought he was capable of. He spoke to stop his thoughts from overwhelming him. "Well," he said, trying for composure. "What is this note? What is a Horcrux?" Granger blanched. "Keep your voice down!" she hissed, glancing at the floor. "Why?" "Mrs. Weasley is up and down these stairs all day. She could hear you." That took him aback. "You mean she doesn't know about this?" "No one does. It's just Harry, Ron, and me, so you can't tell anyone. Do you understand? You mustn't. It's more important than you can possibly know." Draco lowered the locket. "Explain it to me, then." Granger hesitated, reluctance written all over her face. "Granger," Draco said, "you realize you have nothing to bargain with here?" Yes, fine." She sighed, shook her head, and sat down on the edge of the bed. "A Horcrux is a piece of a human soul encased in an object. While that object remains safe, that person cannot die." Draco examined the locket, digesting the information. The pieces were slowly clicking into place in his mind. But there was more squeaking from the stairs, and soon enough Potter and Weasley were shouldering through the door. Draco was ready for them. "Expelliarmus!" With the sweep of his wand, both of their wands flew from their pockets and into his hand. "Oi!" said Weasley, grabbing for his wand as it soared away from him. "What are you playing at, Malfoy?" Potter said. "Give..." Then the color drained from his face. He took a step back into Weasley, who had frozen. He'd seen the locket too. "He was going through your things when I came up here," said Granger hopelessly. I tried to modify his memory, but I don't think even that would be enough. Voldemort can break those charms." "Yeah, that's right," Draco said. "So don't even think about..." "The memory modification would be for your safety, not ours," Granger said impatiently. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into." Weasley shut the door. "What should we do?" he muttered to Potter. "How much have you told him?" Potter asked Granger. "Not very much," she said. "I told him what they are, that's all." "Maybe that's all right then," Weasley said slowly. "He's supposed to go abroad anyway, right? If we just let him disappear..." "Oh, Ron, do you really think he won't tell his parents the instant he gets a chance?" Draco looked up at the ceiling in irritation. It was like he wasn't even in the room. "Excuse me," he said. Can we get back to the point, please? He brandished the locket. Potter, Granger, Weasley, I don't care which one of you does it. Tell me what this is. I told you, Granger said. I already told you what a Horcrux is. But this isn't a Horcrux. Yes, because someone got to it first, she said with exaggerated patience. We don't know who, but someone was clearly working against Voldemort and wanted to destroy the Horcrux. So they took the real one and replaced it with this decoy. Draco looked between them, wondering if this was a joke. You don't know who? Blimey, said Weasley to Potter with mock sadness. 6 years of Hogwarts education and he can't even read. He looked at Draco, dripping dislike. What? Do you think the letters R.A.B. are someone's full name? This was too good. Draco closed the note back into the locket and laughed. You really don't know, do you? They all looked at him for a long moment. What's that supposed to mean? What do you think it means, Potter? I know who wrote this note. Weasley and Potter traded incredulous looks. Come off it, Weasley scoffed, though he sounded uncertain. But Granger's eyes were piercing into Draco. I think he's serious, she said quietly. It was infuriating, Draco decided, to be spoken about as if every tiny thing he said needed verification. But it was worth it to see the frustration on Potter and Weasley's faces as their eyes traveled from the locket to Draco's face and back. Who? Potter ground out. The single syllable seemed to take great effort. Well, well, Draco said, enjoying himself now. If that's the tone you're going to take... Just tell us, Weasley snapped. You don't know what this could mean. That's what she keeps saying, Draco said, nodding to Granger. You don't know what this could mean. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. You don't know how important this is. Here's an idea. Why don't you tell me what you're talking about, and then I'll know why exactly I should care. I already told you it's for your own safety, Granger said hotly. I thought that was the only thing you cared about. Draco considered for a moment. Fine then, he said with a shrug, dropping the locket back onto the camp bed. I suppose I will ask my parents about it. Maybe we can figure it out together. Maybe we can enlist your parents too, Weasley. No, Weasley said, moving to block the door. He looked from Potter to Granger. I think we have to tell him. Yes, tell him, Draco said. I'm waiting. Granger and Weasley both glanced at Potter, ceding the conversation to him in that uncanny, soundless way they had. Fine, said Potter, though he looked furious. We're tracking down the real Horcrux this year. We're not going back to Hogwarts. We're going to find it and make sure it's destroyed so that Voldemort, well, like the note says, so that he's mortal again. Draco hesitated. He had the sense Potter wasn't telling him everything, but maybe that was just because Potter looked like he was about to punch something. All right, Draco said slowly. So why you three? Why not someone with, I don't know, any qualifications at all? Dumbledore left the job to Harry because of the prophecy, said Granger. And we can't tell anyone else. The more people know, the riskier it is. Because if Voldemort finds out his secret's been compromised, then he can take more steps to protect it. Draco caught her mistake. Protect them, he repeated. There's more than one then, is there? Potter threw an exasperated glance at Hermione, who returned a look of apology. Yeah, Potter said roughly. There's more than one. That all you want to know? Can you tell us who R.A.B. is now? Draco paused, wondering whether to push the point, but Potter and Weasley both looked near violence, so he said, Would have thought you'd know, Potter. He was your godfather's brother, wasn't he? As much as he hated the sight of the three of them, Draco had to admit there was something satisfying about watching their expressions transform, lifting out of dislike and frustration into excitement and comprehension. Regulus, Potter breathed. Regulus Arcturus, all that summer before 5th year we were in there, Weasley said, slapping himself on the forehead. And we didn't remember. Why didn't Dumbledore think of him? Said Granger. Sirius hated talking about his brother, Potter said. He only told me about him once, and he changed the subject pretty quickly too. He wouldn't have wanted to tell Dumbledore about his dead Death Eater brother, not while living in that house. He paused. Besides, Regulus was only a Death Eater for a year or two before he died. Sirius probably wouldn't have thought it was worth mentioning. Draco remembered the clippings about Death Eater activity he'd seen in Regulus's room while he'd been sleeping there. He remembered the photographs of the slight Slytherin boy, a seeker like him, excited by the idea of joining the Dark Lord, a cause of wizarding pride. And if the clipping suggested the group was too violent, that was only because the writers didn't understand the importance of the cause. He did join the Death Eaters then, Draco found himself asking. All three Gryffindors looked at him as if they'd forgotten he was there. Yeah, Potter said. Before he left Hogwarts. Something sat in Draco's chest that felt both heavy and empty, and he turned against the Dark Lord to destroy this Horcrux. That's what the note says, isn't it? Said Weasley. How do you know he's dead? Draco said. They all hesitated. Then Potter said, well, he disappeared. Then they didn't find a body. He could still be alive. Draco didn't like the way they were all looking at him suddenly. Weasley and Potter with palpable awkwardness. Granger with the look she'd worn that night at her house. The look that suggested she understood too much. He's dead, Malfoy, Granger said quietly. If he were in hiding, he would have come back when Voldemort lost his body. She was right, of course, but Draco hated her for saying it. One brief second, he thought he'd learned of a Death Eater his age no less, who'd managed to escape. But then, Regulus Black accepted his death, Draco thought. The note said it all. Black had gone after the Dark Lord's Horcrux. He'd brought it on himself. If he'd just been smarter, maybe he would have survived. Do you think the locket is still in Grimmauld Place? Said Granger, sitting back down on the bed. Malfoy, you lived there, said Weasley. What do you reckon? Draco looked resentfully at Weasley, but could think of no real reason not to answer. No. I lived in his room when I was there. I didn't leave that house for 4 weeks. I had nothing better to do than look around every inch of that place. There wasn't a locket anywhere. Regulus could have stowed it wherever he wanted, Potter muttered. There was no reason for him to leave it in the house. Yeah, there was, said Weasley. His house was full of dark stuff, wasn't it? It would have been the perfect hiding place. If I were him, I would have mixed it in with all that junk we took out before 5th year. That's a good point, Granger said. It would have fit perfectly with... She trailed off. Her eyes had gone round again, but not with fear this time, but with an epiphany. There was a locket, she whispered. What? Said Potter. In the cabinet in the drawing room. A heavy golden locket that no one could open. Do you remember? We all passed it around. Now Weasley and Potter were looking dumbstruck too. But then... Potter rounded on Draco, who flinched back. Malfoy, you said it's not there now. No, Draco said, unsure how he felt about being roped into this. At the same time, it was hard to stop watching the three of them try to solve their mystery for some reason. Hang on, though, Weasley said. Creature nicked a load of stuff that summer. Malfoy, you're sure that locket wasn't in that room in the back of the kitchen? Near the boiler? He's got such a foul sort of nest. Ron, Granger said reproachfully. Oh, that's what that was, Draco said with disgust. No, there was only an old book in there. We have to ask him, though, said Potter, his eyes alight. Maybe he saw it at some point, or maybe he knows which load of things it got thrown out with. He looked around as if expecting the elf to spring out from behind a Chudley Cannon's poster. No! Draco and Granger yelled at the same time. Granger actually lunged out and fastened her hand around Potter's wrist. What? Potter said, startled. What is it? Death Eaters got into Grimmauld Place, Potter, Draco said, his body feeling cold from the closeness of the near miss. If you think they haven't put a magical trace on that elf by now, you're as mad as he is. I'm sure they'll be watching him all the time, Harry, Granger said, letting go of his wrist. I'm sorry, but I don't think we can ask Creature anything. Then what do we do? Said Potter furiously. Search every rubbish dump in London? There was a full minute of silence. Weasley's face was screwed up in concentration, and Granger had closed her eyes, her lips moving slightly. After a long moment, Draco realized he was actually seriously trying to think of an answer to Potter's dilemma, too. He tried to pull himself out of it, getting involved with Horcruxes that had killed Regulus Black for Merlin's sake. But the suggestion was out of him before he could stop himself. There's the Scavengers Guild. The what? Said Granger and Potter at the same time, both regarding him with surprise. The Scavengers Guild, said Weasley. He sounded wary, begrudging, but there was excitement in his eyes. That's an idea, actually. Potter and Granger still looked nonplussed, so Granger went on. Sometimes, muggles pick up magical objects and don't realize what they are, because lots of wizarding objects are spelled to look like rubbish if a muggle comes into contact with them. Galleons and sickles and nuts are all like that. If you drop one and a muggle picks it up, it'll look like an old muggle penny, won't it? Will it? Said Potter, looking startled. Well, yeah, Weasley said. So anyway, muggles wind up chucking loads of magical stuff in the bin, and it ends up in landfills. The scavengers go through, rescue anything magical, polish it up a bit, and resell anything good. They've got a stall in Diagon Alley. Shows up about once a month. Fred and George told me about it last year. They got a good bit of lightweight lead off them. All right, said Potter with rising excitement. All right then, we'll try that. He turned to Draco, opened his mouth, and made no sound whatsoever. Draco knew Potter was about to thank him instinctively for the suggestion, but Potter couldn't make himself form the words. Well, Draco said stiffly, enjoy your search. When he was halfway out the door, Granger said, Malfoy. He turned back. You aren't going to tell anyone, are you? She asked tentatively. He surveyed her anxious expression. The girl sounded so frightened half the time. It was like she was expecting him to bite her nose off for asking a simple question. Why would I? He asked. That's not a real answer, Malfoy, Potter said. Draco sighed. Yes, it is. He rolled his eyes. Gryffindors. Ask one simple question about motive and you're all completely lost. With that, he returned downstairs and traipsed into the yard. For sleeping room, Draco and his parents had been given a grubby tent that opened up into a miserable little apartment. The first time they'd entered it, his mother had been momentarily speechless with horror. Amazing, Draco had said. They found a place even less fit for human habitation than the hovel itself. But neither of his parents even cracked a smile. Draco didn't know why he bothered sometimes. Draco had been teasing Ron Weasley about his house for so long that it felt stupid to be really surprised by what the Burrow was like. Still, he couldn't imagine growing up in a place like this, never having any privacy, everything used and used and used to shreds. It did at least make him appreciate the feeling of coming outside into the evening, when the sky opened up overhead and he could breathe. And it was true, too, he thought begrudgingly, that Mrs. Weasley's cooking was delicious. He felt a bit traitorous for thinking it. Merlin knew his own mother couldn't have done so much as boil a potato. Of course, she'd never had to, since she wasn't a glorified house elf. When he entered the tent, his parents were having tea at the spindly table in the main room. They greeted each other quietly. And then, Draco, already tired, prepared for bed. As he settled beneath the thin sheet, he missed home. He missed the Manor's many large, quiet rooms, its lush, sweet-smelling gardens, its fountains and tastefully decorated wings. He missed Hogwarts, too. The lush velvet and dark leather of the Slytherin common room, the library and its imposing shelves, the sweeping lawns. Now that they were halfway through the summer holiday, he was starting to feel the usual itch of wanting to return. He wondered if it would go away after September 1st. As his eyes drooped shut, he wondered if his friends had adjusted to the idea of his death yet. Had Pansy cried over him? Surely she had. She cried often and vigorously. This would probably have ruined her summer. Normally she couldn't shut up about the summer holidays. She loved them so much. The events the Parkinsons threw at their estate, the days spent sunning herself by the swimming pool, the luxurious trips to wizarding outposts near New York and Hong Kong. Her family were particularly close to the Goyles, so sometimes they went on joint trips, and Crabbe came along too. And Pansy spent the holidays daring the duo into more and more outrageous escapades, and she'd lavishly recount their adventures on the Hogwarts Express back to school. The memories were bright and clear for a while. Then they faded like old photographs. And Draco found himself thinking of a gold locket and a Slytherin seeker looking uncertainly out of a picture frame, whose body had never been found. By the day of the wedding, Hermione felt as if her skull were filled with a swarm of bees. She liked the Delacours very much. She certainly got along better with all three of Fleur's family than with Fleur herself, but the Malfoys had already been 3 too many people to live at the Burrow, and the Delacours stretched this situation to breaking point. Maybe she wouldn't have felt so put upon if she hadn't been secretly packing all of her, Harry's, and Ron's belongings into her small beaded bag. She'd finally perfected the undetectable extension charm the day before, and had lost several hours of sleep feeding her own possessions into it. Library of books, catalog of potion ingredients, and all. The wedding ceremony itself was the first time Hermione had felt relaxed in days. Fleur's radiance seemed to make the whole marquee unnaturally silent, and Hermione's eyes stung as the couple exchanged their vows and then, finally, kissed. It was a sort of catharsis, she thought, as the band started up. Tomorrow they would all travel to Hogwarts for Dumbledore's funeral, but for now they had music and family and friends. She even let herself have a conversation with Luna about Snorkack conservation efforts. Every so often she caught sight of Harry, in disguise as Barney Weasley, and the 3 Malfoys, who had polyjuiced into a butcher's family from the village. The Weasleys had quietly but industriously calculated the idea that the Malfoys were a trio of standoffish family friends, ones who had been living on a remote island off the coast of Iceland for several years and had lost the ability to socialize. So far, this had held up reasonably well, although Victor had struck up a brief conversation with Lucius Malfoy about Icelandic sheep herding. It felt strange to see Victor again. Fourth year seemed impossibly long ago now. The return of Voldemort had separated it into a previous life that she could never re-enter. Hermione could feel wisps of what she'd felt for Victor if she focused hard on drawing up the memory, like closing her eyes and trying to recreate an exact image on the backs of her eyelids, but she knew it was past. When Ron asked her to dance, she didn't think twice about Victor. This is it, she thought, as they whirled and twirled with the laughing crowd. This is where I'll understand what I feel. This is when it all becomes clear. Yet, when a slow song began, and Ron moved closer to hold her waist and take one of her hands in his, she felt a leaden sensation in her stomach, rather than the excited, nervous flutters that she'd felt at the start of the summer. A hard lump formed in her throat. Unable to look up at Ron, she laid her head on his chest instead, looking towards the edge of the tent, where Harry was having a seemingly intense conversation with Ron's Aunt Muriel and Elphias Dodge. But she wasn't thinking about Harry either. She was thinking about Dumbledore's funeral, about Dumbledore falling from the sky, drifting through clouds' ragged edges. She was so afraid, and touching Ron like this, being close to him, it was only exacerbating it. She didn't want to lose him. She didn't want to lose Harry. In that moment, she worried that she was confusing the fear of loss for love. She worried that she could feel nothing at all except the fear of loss, and that until this was all over, that was the only emotion she would be allowed, in various states of volume and intensity. Even worse was the feeling of Ron's heart beating fast against her ear, and when the song ended and they pulled apart, the tender look on his freckled face. From that expression, she knew that while they danced, he'd felt what she wanted to feel, a kind of rapture, of euphoria, the sedative feeling that everything was finally right in the world. But all she'd been able to register was the looming threat of death and attack. It made her feel impossibly alone to realize how far away they'd been from one another in those moments, even as they'd held each other. Ron must have seen something amiss in her face, because he said, "Something wrong?" "I'm just a bit thirsty," she managed. "I'll be back in a moment." It was too late, she thought as she stood on the outskirts of the marquee, folding her warm fingers around the cup of cold pumpkin juice. The idea of Ron taking her aside and kissing her no longer made her feel a thrill, only a new kind of anxiety. Those first golden weeks of July had been their chance, and the chance had passed by. The window had slipped shut. She couldn't tell whether Dumbledore's death had changed things or clarified them. Maybe his death had shaken her so badly that she could no longer feel excitement about romantic possibilities. Or maybe his death had stripped away the complications, all the guilt in history, and made her realize that what she felt for Ron and Harry alike was the desperate elemental need for them to stay alive. Either way, she felt what she felt now, and she didn't think she could go back. She settled into a seat without paying attention. "Granger," said an unfamiliar voice. She looked up to see the polyjuiced Malfoy at the same table. He was a burly boy with black hair, around their age, slightly shorter than Malfoy, but nearly twice as broad in the shoulder. "Oh, hi," she said faintly. "Pumpkin juice?" "Can't," he said sourly. "I'm supposed to stick with this. Another dose in a few minutes." He raised an opaque flagon that held his polyjuice. He was slouched in the chair, legs stretched out, eyeing the dance floor with evident disinterest. "I expect you'll be glad to leave when this is over," said Hermione, unable to conceal a note of disapproval. She thought the Weasleys had been remarkably accommodating of the Malfoys, all things considered. "Glad," said Malfoy with such disdain that it still somehow sounded precisely like him, even in another boy's voice. "Oh, absolutely. I'll be thrilled to leave behind every last speck of my life." "You make it sound as if you're being forced." "Do I have a choice?" She sighed. "Obviously, you have a—" She broke off suddenly. Something silvery had appeared in the center of the dance floor. A messenger Patronus, a lynx, had settled to the ground. A hush spread among the guests. The lynx spoke with the voice of Kingsley Shacklebolt. The Ministry has fallen. Scrimgeour is dead. They are coming. Screams erupted. Then suddenly, the crack, crack, crack of multiple aberrations. Before Hermione had even fully understood what was happening, spells were flying. A jet of white light flew toward their table. Hermione had barely registered it before something was slamming hard into her side, sending her flying out of her chair. Then, bang! She looked up, gasping. Their table was smoking and splintered. Malfoy was sprawled beside her. He'd knocked them both out of the impact radius, and now he was scrambling to his feet, wand in hand. Hermione followed, scanning wildly for Harry and Ron. She saw them almost immediately, already stumbling toward her out of the dust. And there, behind them, the cloaked figures who had apparated in. They were wearing masks, immobilizing everyone they could see. Death Eaters, here, under the wedding marquee. Malfoy staggered back, his face drawn in terror, and Hermione, in the same instant, saw his curly hair start to change, to turn white blonde. She sprinted to his side, seized him by the arm, and grabbed Ron's elbow in the other hand. "Hold on, Harry!" she yelled, allowing him a second to grip Ron's arm before she turned on the spot. They squeezed into the dark space between places. Then they were bursting out onto a wild mountain path that overlooked Hogsmeade Village.